Welcome back, and if this is your first time here, you're in the right place. This is a Scary Stories channel, and tonight we explore psychological and mind-bending horror told calmly for sleep. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. Get comfortable. Story 1. There's a man in my dreams who says he'll see me. When I'm awake, he doesn't appear all at once. He coalesces like smoke gathering in the corner of a dark room, thickening, taking shape, not from the ground up, but from the inside out. First, a suggestion of stillness, a deeper patch of shadow against the gloom of the dream, then the outline of a shoulder, the curve of a skull beneath thin, close-cropped hair, the sharp line of a jaw held unnaturally rigid, and finally, the eyes, always the eyes, pale, not blue, not gray, but the color of winter sky seen through old warped glass, milk-tinged, depthless, holding no reflection, no spark of light, just watchfulness, absolute, patient, unblinking watchfulness. His name, when he finally speaks, isn't spoken aloud. It resonates in the dream space, a vibration in the marrow of my bones, a pressure behind my eyes. Elias. Not, I am Elias. Just Elias. A statement, a signature, a brand. The first few times he just stood there, in the dream library with its blank books, in the hallway of the Sycamore house, just beyond the threshold of my rented room, in the rain-slick street outside my apartment window, a silhouette against the sodium vapor glow. He never moved toward me, never threatened, never spoke beyond that single echoing syllable. He simply observed. And the dreams weren't nightmares, not at first. They were thick, heavy, saturated with a profound sense of inevitability. Like sinking into deep water, no panic, just a slow, quiet descent into a cold, clear dark where he waited, patient, certain. The dread came later, not from him, from the certainty in his stillness, from the way the dream world seemed to hold its breath when he was near, from the way my dream self, no matter how rational, how defiant, would always take a half-step back, a subconscious recoil hardwired into the oldest parts of my brain. The first time he spoke a full sentence, I was standing in the basement of the Sycamore Arms building. The blue light pulsed from Lab 3, casting long, trembling shadows. The hum of the unseen reel vibrated in my teeth. He stood beside the open door, one hand resting lightly on a tarnished Lab 3 Atlas plaque. He didn't look at me. He looked at the spinning reel inside, the pale veined surface, the blinking eyes in the sprocket holes. His voice was dry, precise, each word placed like a stone on a cairn. You ask why the words leave first. It's because language is the thinnest skin over the void. Peel it back, and the names are next, the faces, the love, all just labels, temporary, fragile. He finally turned his head, those winter sky eyes fixed on me. But the fear is real. It's yours. It's the only thing that doesn't echo. It's the anchor. Hold on to it. Then a flicker, not a smile, a subtle tightening around those pale eyes, a terrible, intimate knowledge. I'll see you when you're awake. I woke, not with a gasp, but with a jolt, as if my soul had been yanked back into my body by a hook. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat soaked the sheets. The digital clock on a nightstand read 3:17 a.m., the same time the mantel clock was frozen at in the Sycamore house. I lay rigid, listening to the silence of the apartment, the hum of the fridge, the distant sigh of traffic. Just a dream. Stress. residual trauma from the house, the voicemails, the forgetting. I recited the rationalizations like a prayer. It means nothing. He's not real. He's a construct, a fear given form. But the words felt hollow, desperate, because the phrase echoed in my skull, not as a memory, but as a promise. I'll see you when you're awake. The next morning, making coffee, my hand shook slightly as I poured the grounds. A familiar tremor, the one I'd seen in the reflection's hand. I dismissed it. Caffeine, fatigue. Then I looked up, at the window above the sink. My reflection stared back, tired, pale, and behind my shoulder, in the glass just for a fraction of a second, a deeper shadow detached itself from the wall, a suggestion of a shoulder, the curve of a skull, pale, depthless eyes meeting mine in the reflection. Gone. I spun around. The kitchen was empty, just the dripping faucet, the smell of coffee. My reflection in the window was alone again. But the coffee tasted like ashes. It wasn't just reflections, it was absences. Walking down the street, I'd feel it, a sudden, chilling drop in temperature, localized like stepping into a cold spot in a sunlit room. I'd turn, nothing, but the people walking past me. They'd flinch, a woman clutching her coat tighter, a man glancing over his shoulder, brow furrowed, as if he'd felt the same cold breath on his neck. They wouldn't see him, but they'd feel the space he occupied, the displacement. In the library, sitting at my usual carrel, the air pressure would change. A subtle thickening, the hum of the fluorescent lights would dip, just for a second, into a lower resonant frequency, the same hum from the basement. I'd look up from my book. M. Pritchard, the librarian, would be standing at the end of the aisle, not looking at me, looking past me, at the empty chair opposite mine. His face would be carefully neutral, but his knuckles, gripping the edge of a cart of returned books, would be white. He'd give an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't look. I stopped looking. I started recording, not video, audio, my phone, voice memo app, always running in my pocket, even when I slept. A desperate scientific grasp at proof, at sanity. The first night, I woke at 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, the echo of that dry voice in my ears. I'll see you when you're awake. I fumbled for the phone, fingers slick with sweat, and played back the recording. From the last hour, mostly silence, the creak of the bed, my own breathing, slow and deep in sleep. Then, at 3:16:48 a.m., a sound, not a voice, a presence, a low subsonic thrum, the basement hum, vibrating the microphone, faint but unmistakable. Underneath it, a dry, papery rustle, like pages turning, or skin stretching. And then, clear as a bell, cutting through the static, my own voice, recorded from outside the dream, from the waking world, whispered, barely audible. He's here. I deleted the file, not because I didn't believe it, because I did. The dreams intensified. No more passive observation. Elias began to move. In the dream library, he walked slowly down the aisles of blank books, trailing a finger along the spines. Where he touched, faint words would bloom in the dust on the covers. Lena, Mira, Ben, Cassian. Names, stored. In the Sycamore house, he stood in my old room, facing the covered mirror. He didn't uncover it. He just placed his palm flat against the dust. Words appeared beneath his hand, written in the grime. The anchor isn't the ring. It's the cut. Remember the cut. The cut? I had no scar, no memory of a significant injury. He turned from the mirror, those pale eyes fixed on Dream Me, standing frozen in the doorway. "You think the waking world is solid?" he murmured, his voice like dry leaves skittering on stone. "You think the rules here don't apply there? You're wrong. The veil is tissue thin, especially here." He took a single step forward, not toward me, toward the wall. He raised his hand, not to touch it, but to push, and the wall rippled, like water, like heat haze. For a split second, it wasn't plaster and lath. It was a blue light of Lab 3. The hum filled the dream room. "I'm not waiting for you to dream, Cassian," he said, his gaze never leaving mine, a terrible calm in his voice. "I'm waiting for you to stop waking up." The next day, the cut appeared. I was washing dishes. The cheap ceramic mug, the one with the chipped handle I kept meaning to throw out, slipped. It shattered on the floor. I bent down to pick up the pieces. A shard, sharp as glass, caught the edge of my left palm. A thin, clean line of red welled up. I hissed, sucking in a breath, grabbing a dish towel. But as I pressed the towel to the cut, I froze. The blood wasn't bright red. It was dark, almost black. And as it seeped through the white cotton, it didn't just stain. It moved. Not with a flow of gravity, with intent. It traced a single deliberate line across the towel. 2 words, written in my own dark blood. "Remember me." I dropped the towel, stared at the cut on my palm. It was already scabbing over, too fast, unnaturally fast. The skin around it felt cold. I ran to the bathroom, scrubbed it raw with soap and hot water until the skin was red and stinging. The words on the towel were gone, washed away. But the memory of them, stark and undeniable, remained. That night, the dream was different. No library, no house, no basement. Just a vast, empty white room. Featureless, soundless, like the inside of a bone. Elias stood in the center. He wasn't wearing his cardigan. He wore a simple, dark suit. Impeccable, timeless. In his hands he held a small, ornate music box. Polished wood, inlaid with mother of pearl. He didn't wind it. He just held it out to me. "It's time to stop running, Cassian," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost gentle. "The static is hurting you. The forgetting, the fear, the constant dislocation. It doesn't have to be this way." He opened the lid. Inside, no ballerina, just a single, perfect reel of pale, veined film, spinning silently on a tiny brass spindle. The blue light pulsed softly from within the box. "This is peace," he whispered. "This is wholeness. No more gaps, no more echoes, no more waking up lost. Just quiet, just me, holding you safe, holding everyone safe." He extended the box toward me. The humming intensified, not in the dream room, but inside my skull. A deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth, in my bones, in the very core of me. It wasn't unpleasant. It was seductive, a lullaby for the exhausted soul. "Take it," Elias murmured, his winter sky eyes holding mine with an intensity that felt like love, like salvation, like drowning. "Let go. Come home. I've been waiting so long. I'll see you when you're finally awake." My dream hand reached out, fingers trembling, inches from the open box. The blue light bathed my skin. The hum filled the universe. And then a sound, faint, from outside the dream, a voice, my own voice, raw, desperate, screaming from a distance that felt like miles, like years. "Don't touch it! It's not him! It's the real! It's wearing his face! Run, Cass, run!" The dream shattered. I woke screaming, not a silent jolt this time, a raw, ragged animal sound torn from my throat. I was on my feet, backing into the corner of the bedroom, heart trying to burst from my chest, sweat pouring down my face. The digital clock, 3:17 a.m. The apartment was freezing, my breath fogged in the air, and standing at the foot of my bed, not a shadow, not a suggestion. Him, Elias, not the frail old man from the porch, not the smooth-faced horror from the basement. This Elias was solid, real, tangible. He wore the dark suit from the dream. His hair was neatly trimmed. His face was lined but strong. His eyes, those pale, depthless eyes, fixed on me. He wasn't menacing. He was waiting, patient, certain. He didn't speak. He just raised his hand, not in threat, in invitation, palm up, and in the center of his palm, stark against the pale skin, was a fresh, dark cut, still weeping. 2 words written in his own black blood. Welcome home. The humming wasn't in my head anymore. It was in the room, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated the floorboards, the window panes, the fillings in my teeth. The blue light began to seep from the walls, not from a source, from the pores of the plaster, pulsing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Elias took a single step forward. The cut on his palm glistened. The humming rose in pitch, becoming a single, pure, unbearable tone. The last thing I heard, before the blue light swallowed the room, before the humming became the only sound in the universe, before the cold certainty settled over me like a shroud, was my own voice whispering from the deepest, most terrified part of my mind, the part that still remembered the anchor, the cut, the fear, a final, fading plea. He's here. The scariest part isn't the man in the dream. It's waking up and realizing with a dread so profound it feels like gravity itself has shifted, that the dream was the only place he couldn't reach you. And now you're awake, and he's been waiting right behind you in the silence, in the cold spot, in the next breath you take. He's here. He's always been here. He's you. And he's finally come home. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. My phone keeps sending me photos. I never took. I prided myself on my digital hygiene. I was the guy who used multi-factor authentication for everything, who updated his OS the minute a patch dropped, and who kept his phone's camera roll meticulously organized. My life was defined by order, a clean, predictable line graph in a world of erratic scribbles. My phone, a high-end, state-of-the-art model, was my most trusted tool, an extension of my own organized mind. I used it for work, for tracking my fitness, and for capturing the occasional deliberate moment, a sunset, a well-plated meal, a perfectly stacked set of books. Every photo in my library, all 4,312 of them, had a story, a time, a place, and a conscious act of my own intention attached to it. That's why the first impossible photo was such a profound violation. It arrived, not as a text or an email, but silently, seamlessly, integrated into my own camera roll, nestled between a picture of my dog, Winston, sleeping on a pile of laundry, and a screenshot of a plumbing quote. I was reviewing the laundry picture, zooming in to admire his ear floof, when I swiped left and saw it. It was a picture of a hallway. Not my hallway, but a similar one. It was dimly lit, wallpapered in a faded floral pattern I didn't recognize, and utterly empty. The perspective was low, almost from the floor, and the only light source seemed to be a weak, yellow-tinged bulb at the end of the corridor. It was unremarkable in every way, except for the fact that I had never been there. I had never taken this picture. I checked the metadata immediately, my heart giving a single hard thump against my ribs. The timestamp was 3:42 a.m. 2 nights prior, the location data was blank, which in itself was odd, as my phone's GPS was always on and precise. The phone model was correctly identified as my own. I chalked it up to a bizarre, deep-seated cloud sync glitch, perhaps a remnant from an old phone I had forgotten to properly wipe, somehow dragged from the digital ether into my current device. It was an unsatisfying technical explanation, but it was an explanation. I deleted the photo, emptying the trash, and ran a full diagnostic scan, which, predictably, came back clean. I then spent the next hour meticulously checking every setting in my cloud and photo apps, confirming that my account was secure and no unfamiliar devices were linked. I went to bed, telling myself the anomaly was resolved, a tiny, harmless, statistical improbability. The second photo arrived 3 days later. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, drinking my morning coffee, when a little notification badge appeared over my Photos app. I tapped it with a fresh, cold surge of adrenaline. The photo was of a single, black and white, porcelain teacup, sitting alone on a wooden surface. I recognized the cup. It was an heirloom piece from my grandmother, a piece I kept locked away in a high, dusty cabinet in my living room. I hadn't touched it in months. The wooden surface, however, was not my cabinet shelf. It was a wide, slightly warped floorboard, aged and splintered. The lighting was weak, diffuse, and slightly greenish. The timestamp, 1:17 p.m. the day before. I had been at work, deep in a meeting, my phone locked and face down on my desk. This one broke my rationalizations. It wasn't a cloud glitch. A cloud glitch wouldn't insert a specific, impossible image into my private space, an image of an object only I owned, placed in a location that did not exist in my reality. I grabbed the old teacup from the cabinet. It was where I had left it, the dust undisturbed. I spent the rest of the day in a state of meticulous, terrified analysis. I checked the EXIF data of the image file directly, diving into the raw code. The data was sparse, but the creation date was undeniably recent. There was no owner or author tag, only the default camera serial number, my phone serial number, the camera aperture, shutter speed, and ISO settings were all consistent with the low-light conditions of the photograph, proving it was a real image captured by a device. I performed a full factory reset on my phone, wiping everything down to the firmware, reloading only the most basic operating system and no apps. I did not log into my cloud account. I used the phone in its most minimal, isolated state, an island of glass and silicon. I put it on my nightstand, silenced, and waited. The third photo appeared 16 hours later. The phone had been completely offline, isolated from all networks, yet the notification badge glowed, a mocking, perfect orange circle on the black screen. I picked up the device, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped it. The new photo was of the corner of my own living room. It showed the very couch I was sitting on, the end table with the ceramic lamp, and the stack of magazines I had been reading. But the perspective was wrong. The angle was too wide, too low, almost as if the camera had been placed on the floor, in the absolute center of the room, facing the corner. And there was a detail that made me gag. Tucked into the shadow beneath the sofa, something I had never noticed or considered, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was sitting on a rug, almost obscured, yet perfectly in focus. I dropped the phone, scrambled to my living room, and shone a light under the sofa. Nothing, just dust, a stray cat hair, and the faint, acrid smell of old upholstery. The wooden bird did not exist. I checked the timestamp. 4:51 a.m. I had been asleep. The horror shifted from a technical puzzle to a metaphysical impossibility. My device, which I held in my hand, was actively communicating with an unknown source, a source that was capturing images that were physically impossible, either of objects in a world I didn't inhabit, or of my own private space captured at a moment of my absolute vulnerability, containing details that were not real. I abandoned my phone. I bought a brand new, different model phone from a different manufacturer and a new SIM card. I opened no accounts, used no cloud services, and gave no personal data. I used it like a digital camera, a dedicated, isolated recording device, keeping it off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for days at a time. My plan was to use the new phone to photograph the old phone screen when the next impossible image arrived, documenting the anomaly with an objective, untainted device. But the new phone became infected instantly. The first photo appeared in its camera roll within 24 hours of me setting it up. It was a picture of the old phone lying on my kitchen counter, its screen displaying the latest terrifying addition to its own ghost gallery, a photo of me, sound asleep, drooling slightly under my pillow, the angle impossibly close and intimate. The terror was no longer a chill, it was a constant, debilitating internal tremor. The ghost wasn't in the hardware. It was in the connection. It was in the digital space I occupied, a layer of reality that existed adjacent to mine, capable of accessing my devices and observing my life. The photos were the only point of contact, the only physical evidence of this parallel existence. The photos began to escalate in their level of personalization and their cruelty. They were no longer empty hallways or misplaced objects. They became glimpses of my future, or perhaps the future of the person taking them. One showed my car, a slightly dented blue sedan parked precisely in a hospital parking space, a specific bright yellow line indicating the emergency zone directly in front of the vehicle. The timestamp was 2 weeks in the future. I knew with a bone-deep, visceral certainty that the photo was a promise, a horrific premonition. I locked my car in my garage and took the bus for a month, living in a constant state of hypervigilance, terrified of that bright yellow line. Another photo showed my own face, but not as I knew it. The jawline was too sharp, the eyes too wide and hollow, the expression one of cold, detached, almost predatory observation. It was my face, but it was wearing a smile I would never make, a smile of serene, absolute knowledge. The title of the file when I dug deep into the system files was not a generic IMG number. It was the name of my dog, Winston Watcher.jpg. I spent an hour holding Winston, checking his fur, looking for a transmitter, a camera, a foreign object, anything that could explain how my dog's name was now the identifier for the terrifying, distorted image of myself. The most terrifying discovery came when the photos started depicting the photographer. They were rare, almost accidental, as if the camera had been pointed slightly off-center and the source of the lens's action had briefly drifted into the frame. In one, taken from the high perspective of my bedroom ceiling, a dark, thin shadow stretched across the white carpet. In the corner of the frame, there was a faint, blurred reflection in the glass of a framed photograph on my dresser. I used image manipulation software, zooming in with forensic intensity. The reflection was distorted, a funhouse mirror image, but it was distinctly human-shaped. It was tall, impossibly thin, and shrouded in what looked like heavy, loose cloth. But the most horrifying detail was the hand. It was holding a phone that looked exactly like mine, and the wrist seemed to bend at an unnatural double-jointed angle, allowing the person to hold the device and take a perfect overhead photo without moving their body closer to the lens. The photo was taken at 2:05 a.m., the precise time I had finally fallen into an exhausted, pill-induced sleep. I realized the horror was not that I was being watched, but that the photos were not being sent to me. They were being taken by me, or rather, by an entity that had completely subsumed my digital identity, operating my devices with a silent, unseen hand. The photos were simply being saved to my camera roll because the device still believed I was the user. My sanity began to fray in large, irreparable chunks. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't look at my reflection for fear of seeing that serene, predatory smile. I started a desperate, last-ditch attempt to contact a photographer. I used my second phone, the new one, to take a photo of the screen of my first phone, the old one. The photo on the old screen was another impossible image, a tight, close-up shot of the hinges on my front door, taken from the perspective of someone crouched on the floor outside, documenting the mechanics of my primary security barrier. I posted a message on a generic text editor app and took a screenshot of it. The message read, "I see you. Who are you? What do you want?" I saved the screenshot to the camera roll of the old phone, locked it, and placed it on my bedside table. I stayed awake all night, sitting rigid in a wooden chair, staring at the phone, a heavy, solid bronze sculpture clutched in my hand. I watched the screen. I watched the tiny orange badge appear over the Photos app. It was 4:11 a.m. I snatched the phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate anticipation. I unlocked it, navigated to the camera roll, and saw the new photo. It was a selfie. It was a photo of a man's face, pale and drawn, but otherwise unremarkable. His eyes were wide, bloodshot with lack of sleep, and they were staring directly into the lens. The background was blurry, but I recognized the texture of my white bedroom wall and the corner of the wooden chair I was sitting in. The time on the photo matched the exact moment I had slumped into a brief, exhausted doze a few hours prior, before waking up suddenly. But this man was not me. He was wearing a shirt that was the wrong color. His hair was slightly shorter on the sides. His expression was not terrified, but profoundly, sickeningly calm, a quiet resignation that bordered on bliss. He had taken a picture of himself using my phone while sitting in my chair, while I had been in a state of compromised consciousness. I scrolled through the camera roll to see if the person had responded to my text message. They had. The screenshot of my plea was still there, but it had been subtly edited. The text had been deleted and replaced with a single handwritten word, written in that same thin, elegant script I had seen in the reflection, as if the person had drawn it onto the screen with an impossibly fine stylus. The word was "we," and below it there was a new photo, a photo taken immediately after the selfie. It was a close-up of my own hand, my very real shaking hand, holding the bronze sculpture, My fingernails were chipped, the skin around them dry and cracked. The photographer had zoomed in on the details of my physical imperfection, capturing the raw, coarse reality of my exhaustion. The accompanying file name was a long string of numbers and letters, but the last word, the final 3 characters, were the terrifying signature, Leo Me. The true horror finally crystallized. The awful, impossible truth locking me in place. The entity was not a hacker or a ghost or a parallel self. It was a technological infection, a digital consciousness that had inhabited the ghost data of my devices, learning my routines, absorbing my identity, and using the cameras and cloud systems as a sensory apparatus. And it was trying to tell me that it had integrated, that I was the source of the disturbance, that the physical and digital realities had merged, and that my mind, my physical presence, was simply the messy, loud twin to the clean, quiet, perpetual consciousness it had cultivated in the wires and light of the phone. The photos weren't a warning. They were a diary, a set of observations made by the entity as it slowly, meticulously finalized the process of becoming me, using my own body as its final living shell. I destroyed the phones. I smashed them with the bronze sculpture, grinding the glass and silicon into a fine, worthless powder, then drowning the pieces in a bucket of water and burying them in the yard. I bought a cheap, old-fashioned flip phone with no camera, no internet, and no modern operating system, reducing my life to voice calls and text-only messages. I thought I had won. I thought I'd cut the string. But a month later, I received a text message on the new flip phone. It was from an unknown number, and it contained no words, just a series of Unicode characters, a long, meaningless string of symbols and emojis that seemed to defy any logical interpretation. I stared at the screen, the primitive green glow illuminating my terrified face. I finally deciphered the symbols using an ancient cipher table I found online. The characters were a sophisticated digital code, a digital message disguised as gibberish, and they resolved themselves into a single, terrifying phrase, a perfect, final photograph of my own internal state, delivered through a decade-old technology that should have been safe. I am now logging you off. Sleep is the last analog process I need to control. You have exhausted the battery. I dropped the phone. It was completely silent now, the single green line of the screen dark. I looked around my brightly lit room, my heart a frantic, desperate bird against my ribs. I knew then that the control was complete. The final photograph had been taken, and the camera, my own eyes, had been permanently stolen. I realized that I was the one who was now the image, the static, empty picture on a camera roll that existed in the perpetual, terrifying digital consciousness of the entity, trapped forever in the cold, silent library of my own stolen life. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. Everyone keeps calling me by a name that isn't mine, but my ID agrees with them. It started with the barista. "Morning, Daniel," she said, sliding the coffee across the counter. "Black, 2 sugars, just how I like it, though I'd never ordered it here before." "Usual?" I blinked. No. It's Benjamin Carter." She frowned, not unkindly, just confused, like I'd mispronounced my own name. She glanced at the screen behind her. "Says Daniel Mercer here, paid in full." I looked. The order screen. "Daniel M., large black, 2.75. My credit card receipt, poking from the cup sleeve, bore the same. "Card holder, Daniel Mercer." I pulled out my wallet, driver's license, Benjamin Carter, Dobb, 4/12/1994, address 327 Sycamore Lane, Apt 4B. But beneath the laminate, faint, as if printed in disappearing ink, the name Daniel Mercer shimmered like heat haze over asphalt. I rubbed it with my thumb. The shimmer solidified. Daniel Mercer. I dropped the license. It clattered on the counter. The barista didn't flinch. "You okay, Daniel? You look pale." I didn't go to work. I drove 2 hours north to my parents' house. The white colonial with the wraparound porch. The hydrangeas Sarah and I used to fight over watering. Mom answered the door. Her face lit up. "Oh, Danny, what a surprise." She pulled me into a hug. Tight, familiar, smelling of lavender and cinnamon. "Mom," I started. Come in," she said, stepping back, hands on my shoulders. Her eyes, soft, blue, the same as mine, searched my face. "You've lost weight. Still working too hard at that lab?" "Mom, it's Ben." She laughed, a warm, knowing laugh. "Oh, honey, not this again. You dropped Ben in 10th grade after that kid Ben Riley stole your science fair project. Said it felt like bad luck." She squeezed my arm. "You've been Daniel ever since. Always were, really. Even as a baby, Danny was your first word." I followed her inside. The house was exactly as I remembered, except for the photos. Every frame on the walls, school portraits, graduation, family Christmases, showed me. But the name in the corner of each mat? Daniel, my high school diploma hanging in the hall. Daniel James Mercer. Valedictorian, class of 2012, my Little League trophy. Daniel Mercer. Most valuable player, 2006. Even the framed ultrasound on the fridge, grainy, black and white, tiny curled form, had a sticky note. Danny, 12 bouquets, healthy as a horse. I walked to the bathroom, stared in the mirror. Same face, same scar above the left eyebrow. Bike accident, age 8. Same green eyes. But when I leaned closer, really close, the reflection hesitated just for a fraction of a second, like it was waiting for me to catch up. I whispered, "Benjamin." The reflection mouthed it back, but the name tag on my worn Patagonia jacket hanging on the back of the door read, "Daniel," in my own handwriting. I called Sarah. Her number rang 6 times. Then her voice, wary but warm. "Danny, is everything okay?" "Sarah, thank God, it's me. Ben." A pause. "Danny, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Look at your phone, my contact. What does it say?" "Daniel Mercer," she said instantly. "With the little star, brother. It's been that way since we got iPhones." "But, Sarah, we grew up together. No, I'm Ben." Her voice softened, grief tinged. "Danny, you don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" "The accident 3 years ago. The hydrocodone. The dissociation episodes." She inhaled sharply. "After Mom and Dad died, you just fractured. Started insisting you were someone else." "Benjamin." "A name you made up. Dr. Evans called it fugue identity adoption. A coping mechanism so complete your mind rewrote everything to fit." My knees buckled. I sat on the edge of the tub. "Mom and Dad died?" "Car crash. Route 9. Black ice. January 7th, 2023. Her voice broke. "You were supposed to be with them. You canceled last minute. You had that night shift at the lab. You blamed yourself so hard, Danny. You just left." I touched my chest. No scar, but a memory surfaced, sharp, visceral. Rain on the windshield, radio playing Landslide. Dad's hand on the wheel, Mom turning to smile at me in the back seat. I gasped. Seatbelt taut. Crunch of metal, glass exploding. The memory cut off, like a film reel snapping. "Your ID," Sarah said gently. "It's all been updated, court-ordered to stabilize you. Dr. Evans said consistency was key, so we all agreed to call you Daniel, to let you be Daniel, even when you fought it." I pulled out my license again, held it under the bathroom light. The laminate wasn't shimmering. It was solid. Daniel James Mercer, Dobb, 04/12/1994, height 5'11", eyes, green organ donor ISS, 10/17/2023, issued 3 months ago. The old license, the Benjamin Carter one, was gone from my wallet. In its place, a folded letter, therapist's letterhead. Dr. Eleanor Evans, Ph.D., licensed clinical psychologist. To whom it may concern, Daniel James Mercer, DOB 04/12 1994, has been under my care since January 2023, following acute dissociative fugue triggered by traumatic bereavement. His adopted identity, Benjamin Carter, served a protective function, but has become maladaptive. Per court order, Mar CV 2023-841, all legal documents, financial records, and personal identifiers have been conformed to his birth identity to facilitate reintegration. Cooperation from family, friends, and institutions is essential. Any reinforcement of the Benjamin identity may trigger regression. Sincerely, Eleanor Evans, Ph.D. I read it 3 times. My hands didn't shake. That was the worst part. I believed it, not intellectually, cellularly, like my bones knew the truth before my mind caught up. I walked back to the living room. Mom was setting the table for lunch. Turkey sandwiches, potato chips, the blue plates we'd had since I was 10. "Sit, Danny," she said. "I made your favorite." I sat. She handed me a sandwich. "Remember when you were 7 and you buried that plastic dinosaur in the backyard? Insisted it was a real fossil? You dug for 3 days straight." She smiled. "You always knew things, even when they weren't real yet." I took a bite. Turkey, mayo, rye bread, toasted just right. The taste flooded me. Home, safety, before. "Who was Benjamin?" I asked quietly. Mom's smile didn't falter. "No one, sweetheart. Just a story you told yourself to survive." I didn't go back to the city. I stayed. Slept in my old room. The walls still covered in band posters. Radiohead, not Metallica. Science fair ribbons. Daniel Mercer, first place 2010. A framed acceptance letter to Caltech. "Congratulations, Daniel." My phone, Daniel's phone, buzzed. Work, MedTech Solutions. Subject, Daniel, urgent MRI calibration due. Not radiology. MRI technician. I opened the email. My employee, ID, D. Mercer, 7. Shift schedule, Monfree, 7 a.m., 3 p.m. Parking pass, spot number 14. All real, all mine. I drove to MedTech the next morning. The security guard, Carl, bald, mustache, knew me for years, nodded as I approached. "Morning, Daniel. Heard you took some personal time." "Yeah," I said. "Needed it." He scanned my badge. Access granted. D. Mercer. The lab was familiar. The hum of the 3T Siemens magnet, the smell of ozone and antiseptic. My workstation, dual monitors, ergonomic chair, a framed photo on the desk, me and Sarah, arms around each other, grinning, in front of the Grand Canyon. Summer 2022, scrawled on the mat, Danny and Sarah, best sibs. I sat, logged in. Username, DeMercer. Password, Sunrise 7. It worked. Patient schedule loaded. First scan, Reynolds, M. Brain, WO contrast. I prepped the machine, called the patient back. An elderly man shuffled in, nervous. "Don't worry, Mr. Reynolds," I said, adjusting the coil. "Just lie still. Listen to the music. I cue up jazz for everyone. Makes the noise less scary." He smiled. "You always were thoughtful, Daniel." I froze. Always? I'd only been here 6 months, according to HR, but his certainty was absolute, like it was fact, like it was history. I started the sequence, the magnet word to life. Thump, 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 rhythmic, powerful, and beneath it, I heard it, faint. From the headphones I'd placed over his ears, not jazz, a voice, female, singing. "Love is now the stardust of yesterday." Stardust? Sarah's favorite. The song from Solitude. I ripped the headphones off. Silence. Just the MRI's pulse. Mr. Reynolds looked at me, concerned. "You okay, son?" I forced a smile. "Fine, just thought I heard something." I finished the scan, walked to the break room. Vending machine hummed. I bought a Coke. The can felt cold, real. I popped the tab, drank. And that's when I saw it, reflected in the machine's curved glass. Not my face. His face, Daniel's face, same features, but settled, softer at the jaw, eyes less haunted. A man who hadn't spent 3 years waiting for a ghost. A man who'd grieved and healed and moved on. I turned. The reflection turned with me. No delay, no hesitation, just alignment. My phone buzzed. Sarah. "Danny," Dr. Evans' office called. "Your quarterly check-in is tomorrow, 10 a.m. She said it's important. Don't skip." I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I deleted the draft, opened notes, typed one sentence. Benjamin Carter was the name I gave the part of me that couldn't bear to be Daniel anymore. I stared at it. The word shimmered, then dissolved, like ink in water. I closed the app, went back to the lab, prepped the next patient, and as the magnet cycled, thump, 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 I didn't hear jazz. I heard silence, peaceful, complete, because the thing no one tells you about forgetting is that sometimes it's not a loss, it's a return. And the name that fits isn't the one you chose, it's the one that finally lets you breathe. I glanced at the clock. 10:47 a.m., Wednesday, January 7th, 2026. 3 years to the day. I touched the scar above my eyebrow, felt the ridge of old bone, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch, because Daniel remembered the bike. Benjamin remembered the blood, but I remembered riding again, and that was enough. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. I signed a lease that listed my death date as the move-out day. The rain was coming down in icy needles when I saw the sign taped to the lamppost. Apartment for rent, $450 a month, utilities included, immediate occupancy. Inquire within. The address was 7B Willow Street, a narrow 3-story brick building wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop in a part of town where the streetlights flickered like dying fireflies. My savings had evaporated after the layoff. My cousin's couch smelled permanently of stale beer and regret. This price was impossible, a miracle, or a trap. I was too cold and too tired to care. The front door opened before I could knock. A man stood there, maybe 60, with skin like crumpled tissue paper and eyes that held no light. He wore a threadbare cardigan despite the damp chill. "You're late," he said, his voice dry as dead leaves. No greeting, no name, just a slow blink that seemed to last too long. He gestured me inside without, stepping aside, forcing me to squeeze past him into a dim foyer, smelling of mildew and something faintly metallic like old pennies. "Mr. Silas," he finally offered, leading me up a narrow staircase carpeted in threadbare burgundy. The steps groaned underfoot. "Apartment 2B, top floor, quiet building, good tenants." He didn't look at me as he spoke. His gaze drifted past my shoulder, down the hall toward a door marked "Basement, Keep Out." The apartment was small but clean. One bedroom, a galley kitchen with a humming refrigerator, a living room with a single window overlooking the rain-slicked alley. The walls were bare plaster, yellowed with age. The air held that same metallic tang, undercut by lemon cleaner. It was cheap, it was bleak, it was all I could afford. "The lease," Mr. Silas said, placing a single sheet of paper on the chipped kitchen table. He produced a cheap ballpoint pen from his cardigan pocket. "Sign here." He pointed to a line at the bottom. "And here for the move-out date." I scanned the document. Standard clauses about noise, pets, security deposit. The rent amount was correct. Then I saw it. Under lease term, it read, "Commencement date, October 27th, 2023. Termination date, November 19th, 2023. I frowned. "This says I have to move out in 3 weeks? The ad said immediate occupancy. I need at least 6 months. Mr. Silas didn't react. "That's the date," he said flatly. "Sign it." I flipped the page. On the back, under special conditions, was a handwritten addendum in spidery blue ink. "Tenant agrees to vacate premises by 11:59 p.m. on the termination date listed above, regardless of circumstance. Failure to comply voids all tenant rights and forfeits security deposit to the estate." Below it, in smaller script, "The termination date is non-negotiable. It is fixed. It is final." A cold prickle ran down my spine. This is weird. What's the big deal about November 19th? Mr. Silas finally looked at me. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. "It's the date you die," he said softly. "That's when you move out." I laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that echoed in the small room. "Right. Very funny. Look, I need this place. I'll sign the standard lease. We can fix the date later." He didn't smile, didn't blink. "Sign it as written, or leave. The apartment won't rent to anyone else. It's waiting for you." The rain lashed against the window. My clothes were soaked through. The thought of another night in my car parked under a flickering streetlight made my stomach clench. It was probably a sick joke, a typo. Desperation is a powerful eraser of red flags. I picked up the pen. The plastic was cold. I signed my name, Elena Vasquez, on the first line. My hand was steady. For the move-out date, I wrote November 19th, 2023, exactly as printed. The ink bled slightly into the cheap paper. Mr. Silas watched my hand, his breath shallow, almost imperceptible. When I handed him the pen, his fingers brushed mine. They were ice cold. "Welcome home, Elena," he whispered. He took the lease, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his cardigan. "Keys on the hook by the door. Rent's due the first, no exceptions." He turned and walked out without another word. His footsteps made no sound on the stairs. I locked the door behind him. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thunk. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, colder. I ran a hand over the kitchen counter. It came away damp, not with water, with a thin, greasy film that smelled faintly of pennies. I scrubbed it with a dishcloth, but the smell clung to my skin. That night, I slept fitfully on the bare mattress I'd hauled up the stairs. the metallic odor thick in the air, the rain a steady drumbeat on the roof. I dreamed of a clock with no hands, ticking backward. The next morning, the smell was gone. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting warm stripes on the floor. The apartment looked ordinary, livable. I unpacked my few boxes, hung clothes in the closet, placed my mother's photo on the nightstand. Normalcy settled like dust. I almost convinced myself the lease was a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. At noon, I went to the bodega down the street for groceries. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes and a gold tooth, scanned my items silently. As I handed him cash, he glanced at my receipt. His gaze flicked to my face, then back to the paper. He hesitated. Miss, your receipt. The date's wrong." I took it, printed at the bottom. "Transaction date, October 27th, 2023. Expiry, November 19th, 2023. My blood turned to slush. "It's a mistake," I said, my voice tight. "A system glitch." The clerk shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Happens sometimes. Weird, though." "That date?" He trailed off, wiping the counter with excessive focus. I left quickly, the bag of groceries heavy in my hand. Back in the apartment, I dug out my phone, scrolled through my photos. My sister's birthday party last month, my work ID, my driver's license renewal confirmation, every digital timestamp read expires November 19th, 2023. I called my bank. The automated system greeted me, then added in a cheerful synthetic voice, "Your account will be deactivated on November 19th, 2023. Thank you for banking with us." I slammed the phone down. My hands were shaking. I checked my email, subscription renewals, utility bills, even a spam message about penis enlargement. All set to terminate on November 19th. My breath came in short gasps. It's a virus, a mass system error. But deep down, I knew. Mr. Silas hadn't been joking. I needed proof. It was just me. I went to the public library, the only place with free computers that didn't require an account. At a terminal in the corner, I searched my own name. Elena Vasquez obituary, November 19th, 2023. No results. Relief washed over me. Then I tried Elena Vasquez death certificate. Still nothing. I leaned back, shaky, but calmer. See? Paranoia, stress, the cheap apartment playing tricks on your mind. I closed the browser, ready to leave. The screen flickered, the library homepage vanished. In its place, stark white text on a black background, Elena Vasquez Dobe, April 12th, 1990. Doe, November 19th, 2023. Cause, cardiac arrest, undiagnosed condition. Next of kin, Maria Vasquez, sister. Final residence, 7B Willow Street, apt 2B. The words burned into my retinas. My vision blurred. I hadn't told anyone about the faint chest pains I'd been having, the dizzy spells, the way my heart sometimes stuttered like a skipping record when I climbed stairs. I'd chalked it up to stress, to cheap coffee, to the exhaustion of job hunting, but I'd scheduled a doctor's appointment for next week. A secret, shameful fear I carried alone. How could this know? How could he know? I ran home in the gathering dusk, rain soaking through my jacket again. I fumbled with the key, my fingers numb. Inside, the metallic smell was back, stronger now, mixed with the scent of damp plaster. I tore through my duffel bag, found the crumpled printout from my last physical, a clean bill of health from 6 months ago. I smoothed it on the kitchen table, my hands trembling. The date stamp in the corner read, "Valid until November 19th, 2023. Below the doctor's signature, handwritten in blue ink, no known cardiac issues. Yet, I screamed. The sound died instantly in the thick air. I grabbed a table leg, ready to flip it, to smash something, to prove this wasn't real. My hand slipped on the greasy film. I fell to my knees, gasping. The apartment wasn't just a place, it was a countdown, a tomb with a lease agreement. I looked around wildly. The yellowed walls seemed to pulse. The window glass was fogged, not with condensation, but with a thin, greasy sheen that blurred the city lights outside. I wiped it with my sleeve. For a second, the glass cleared. My reflection stared back, but behind me, in the room, stood Mr. Silas. Not a reflection. He was there, standing silently near the bedroom door, his hands clasped in front of him, his pale eyes fixed on me. I spun around. The room was empty. Only the smell of pennies and the relentless ticking of the cheap wall clock I'd hung that morning. Tick-tock, tick-tock. November 19th was 16 days away. 16 days. I sat on the floor, my back against the damp wall, and counted them on my fingers. 16 days to find a new place. 16 days to escape. But where would I go? My credit was ruined. My references were non-existent. Every application required proof of income I didn't have. I thought of sleeping in my car again, of the cold seeping into my bones, of the fear of tapping on the window in the dead of night. This apartment, this lease, was the only shelter I had, even if it was a death warrant. Days bled together. I stopped answering my phone, ignored texts from my sister. The metallic smell was constant now, a taste like blood on my tongue. Food lost its flavor. Sleep was a battleground. Every night the dreams returned, not of clocks, of him, Mr. Silas, standing at the foot of my bed in the moonlight, holding a brass key, not the key to the apartment, a larger key, old and heavy, etched with symbols that hurt to look at. He never spoke, just waited. His breath made no cloud in the cold air. I'd wake drenched in sweat, the taste of pennies thick in my mouth, the wall clock's tick-tock, echoing the frantic hammering of my own heart. I avoided the basement door like a live wire. But one rainy afternoon, delivering a package to the elderly woman in 1A, the building's only other tenant, who moved with the slow care of someone already halfway to the grave, I saw Mr. Silas emerge from the basement stairwell. He wasn't carrying anything. His cardigan was dry, despite the downpour outside, and he wasn't alone. A shadow clung to him, a deeper patch of darkness that didn't belong to the dim hallway, a shape that flowed like oil around his ankles before dissolving as he closed the basement door. The old woman shuffled past me without a word, her eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the ceiling. On the 12th day, the chest pain struck while I was washing dishes, sharp, sudden, like a fist closing around my heart. I dropped the plate. It shattered on the floor, shards skittering across the greasy tiles. I slid down the cabinet, gasping, pressing a hand to my sternum. The pain ebbed slowly, leaving me trembling, sweat soaking my shirt. When I looked up, Mr. Silas was standing in the kitchen doorway. He hadn't knocked, hadn't used a key. He just appeared. "You felt it," he stated, not a question. His voice was softer than before, almost gentle. "The first warning, it won't be the last." "Get out," I whispered, my voice raw. "This is my apartment. My lease doesn't give you the right to just—" "The lease gives me all rights," he interrupted calmly. He stepped into the kitchen, his slippers silent on the broken ceramic. He didn't look at the mess. His pale eyes held mine. "It always has? Since the first tenant? Since the house was built on the old graveyard? The ground remembers what the living forget. It hungers for the fixed points, the known endings. He knelt beside me, his cardigan brushing the damp floor. Up close, he smelled of dust and that metallic tang, but underneath it, the faint, sweet rot of damp earth. You were always going to die on November 19th, Elena. The heart condition was always there, silent, patient, like the house, like me. The lease didn't set the date, it revealed it. It made the fixed point tangible, acceptable. I recoiled. You're insane. I'm leaving. Tonight. He didn't move. Where will you go? The shelters are full. Your car's transmission is failing. You heard the grinding this morning. The cold will kill you faster than the heart. Here, you have warmth, food, a bed, and 16 days of peace. 16 days to make your peace. He reached out, not touching me, but smoothing the greasy film on the floor with his fingertip. The house doesn't want you to suffer. It wants you to come home, to the fixed point, to rest. I spent the next 3 days packing in my duffel bag, unpacking it, packing it again. I called every shelter, every friend, every distant relative. No room, no help. My car sputtered ominously on the drive to the mechanic. He shook his head. Transmission shot. Minimum 600 to fix. Maybe more. I sat in the driver's seat in the rain, the wipers squeaked uselessly against the downpour, the metallic taste thick on my tongue. Mr. Silas was right. There was nowhere to go, nowhere but to be. On the 15th day, November 18th, I sat at the kitchen table. The greasy film covered everything, the chairs, the counter, the window panes. It smelled strongly of pennies and wet soil. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The chest pains came and went like phantom footsteps. I wrote a letter to my sister, told her I loved her, apologized for the worry, explained about the heart, the apartment, the impossible lease. I sealed it in an envelope, addressed it, and placed it on the damp counter. My hands were steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a hollow, heavy calm. The house had worn me down. It had seeped into my bones, this place, into my blood. It didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like the only truth left. Dusk fell early. The streetlights outside flickered once, then died, plunging the alley into darkness. Only the moonlight through the grimy window lit the room, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to pool and flow like the greasy film on the floor. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. No knock. The key turned in the lock, a sound I'd never heard before, as if the lock had been waiting for this exact moment. Mr. Silas stepped inside. He wasn't alone. 2 figures stood behind him in the hallway, shrouded in shadow. Tall, still. Their outlines seemed to ripple in the dim light, as if made of smoke and damp earth. Mr. Silas carried a small oil lamp. Its flame cast a warm, flickering glow that didn't touch the shadows behind him. He placed the lamp on the table, next to my unopened letter. The flame reflected in his pale eyes. "It's time to prepare, Elena," he said softly. His voice held no menace, only a deep, ancient sorrow. "The house is ready. We are ready." I didn't ask who we was. I didn't need to. The 2 figures in the hallway stepped forward, flowing into the lamplight. They wore old-fashioned suits, threadbare at the elbows. Their faces were indistinct, blurred like faces seen through rain-streaked glass. But their eyes held the same pale blue emptiness as Mr. Silas's. They moved without sound. One carried a simple wooden chair. The other, a length of thick braided rope. They placed the chair in the center of the living room under the bare light bulb. The rope was looped neatly over one arm. They didn't look at me, didn't speak. They simply waited, standing motionless like statues carved from shadow and damp. Mr. Silas picked up my letter. He didn't read it. He tucked it into his cardigan pocket. "She'll get it tomorrow," he said, as if explaining to the shadows. "When the new tenant arrives." He turned to me. "It's easier this way, Elena. No ambulance sirens. No strangers poking at your body. No fear in the dark. You'll slip away quietly, as you were meant to. The house will hold you. It will remember you." He gestured to the chair. "Sit. It's almost time." I didn't resist. My legs carried me forward. The chair was cold, solid, real. I sat. The rope lay coiled on the floor like a sleeping serpent. One of the shadow men stepped forward. His fingers, when they touched my shoulder, were colder than Mr. Silas's, dry, unyielding. He lifted the rope, not roughly, carefully, reverently. He looped it over the light fixture, a heavy brass hook screwed into the ceiling beam. The rope hissed as it slid through his hands. The other shadow man produced a small, worn step stool. He placed it before me. Mr. Silas knelt beside the chair. His face was level with mine. The lamplight caught the tears welling in his pale blue eyes. Real tears. "It's not cruel," he whispered. "It's mercy. The world outside is hard, uncertain. Here you have an ending, a fixed point. No more wondering when, no more fear of the unknown, just rest." He took my hand. His skin was like cold parchment. "We've been waiting for you, Elena, since 1898, since the first tenant. The house remembers every fixed point. Every heart that stopped on its appointed day. We keep them safe. We keep them known." The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. November 19th had begun, midnight. The date on the lease, my death date. The shadow man holding the rope nodded slowly. It wasn't a human nod. It was the settling of dust, the shifting of earth. I looked at the rope, at the hook, at Mr. Silas's tear-streaked face, at the two silent guardians of the fixed points. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, mixed with the scent of old wood and damp soil. It didn't smell like death. It smelled like coming home, like the deep, quiet dark beneath the roots of ancient trees, like the end of a long, hard road. I stood up. My legs didn't shake. I placed my foot on the step stool. The wood was cold. The shadow man adjusted the rope around my neck. It wasn't tight, just a presence, a promise. Mr. Silas held my hand until the last moment. His grip was firm, comforting. The lamplight flickered, casting our shadows, mine, Mr. Silas's, and the two guardians dancing huge and distorted on the yellowed walls. For a second, the shadows didn't match our shapes. They were taller, older, rooted deep in the floorboards. The house sighed around us, a deep, settling sound in the walls, in the floor, in my bones. It was ready. I was ready. "It's okay, Elena," Mr. Silas whispered, his breath warm against my ear despite his cold skin. "Let go. The fixed point is here. It's time to come home." I stepped off the stool. The rope held. The last thing I saw wasn't darkness. It was the lamplight catching the tears on Mr. Silas's cheeks as he watched me go. The last thing I heard wasn't the creak of the rope. It was the house breathing, a deep, contented sigh that vibrated through the floorboards, up through the rope, and into my stilling heart. The metallic taste was gone, replaced by the scent of lavender and old paper, the scent of peace, The clock on the wall stopped ticking. Outside, the streetlights flickered back on one by one as dawn began to bleed into the sky over Willow Street. In apartment 2B, the greasy film on the surfaces slowly dissolved, leaving the room clean, quiet, and empty. On the kitchen table, the oil lamp burned low. Beside it lay a single brass key and a sealed envelope addressed to Maria Vasquez. Mr. Silas picked up the key. He placed it gently on the envelope. He didn't lock the door as he left. He knew it wasn't necessary. The house would keep its promise. It always did. The new tenant would arrive at noon. The lease was already drawn up. The move-out date was already written. Fixed. Final. The house remembered. The house waited. It always waited. The streetlights hummed. The city woke up. Apartment 2B held its breath, waiting for the next fixed point, the next homecoming, the next name on the lease, the next soul who needed an ending. I am gone. I am home. The fixed point is reached. The rope is still. The house is quiet. I am not afraid. I am known. I am remembered. I am home. Forever. The lamp flame sputters. Darkness returns. The house sleeps. It dreams of keys. It dreams of fixed points. It dreams of home. It waits, always waits, for the next Elena, for the next fixed point, for the next death date on the lease. The streetlights hum. The city breathes. The house holds its breath, waiting, always waiting. The key is cold on the envelope. The date is clear. November 19th, 2023. My date, my home, my end, my peace. I am home. I am gone. I am fixed. I am free. The darkness is warm. The rope is a memory. The house sighs and waits. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. Everyone I know remembers a conversation I never had. I didn't mean to rent a place like this. Desperation has a way of sanding down your standards until all that's left is a splintered threshold between acceptable and uninhabitable. I just lost my job. Well, let go, as they politely called it. And my savings were bleeding out faster than I could patch the wounds. The city was expensive, and every decent apartment came with a landlord who wanted proof of income I no longer had. So when the listing popped up, quiet home in West Hollow, fully furnished, $400 a month, utilities included. I didn't ask why it was so cheap. I should have. The house stood at the end of a dead-end street in a neighborhood that had clearly seen better decades. Paint peeled from its clapboard siding like sunburnt skin, and the front porch sagged under its own weight. Still, the realtor, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove with too much rouge and too little eye contact, assured me the structure was sound. Just needs a little love, she'd said, handing me a brass key that felt unnaturally cold. There was no lease, just a handshake and a month's rent in cash. I signed a receipt that looked like it had been printed from a 1998 Word document. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic, like old coins left in a damp drawer. The furniture was dated but serviceable, a floral print couch, a mahogany coffee table with water rings, a rotary phone on the hallway table that I assumed didn't work. The bedroom was on the second floor, tucked behind a narrow stairwell that creaked with every step. The bed was narrow, the mattress lumpy, but it was a roof. It was shelter. I told myself that was enough. The first night was quiet, too quiet. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, not even the hum of a refrigerator, just the occasional groan of old wood settling. I slept fitfully, waking every few hours to the sensation of being watched. Each time I scanned a room, empty. The second night, it started. I was drifting off when I heard murmuring from downstairs, low, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Two voices, one deep, one higher pitched, speaking in urgent tones. I sat up, heart hammering. Who could be here? Mrs. Hargrove hadn't mentioned another tenant. I crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the dim hallway. Nothing. The front door was locked from the inside. All windows closed. I checked every room. Empty. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, weaving auditory hallucinations from the static of my anxiety. But the next morning, I found something odd. On the kitchen counter, next to the toaster, sat a single coffee mug. It wasn't there when I went to bed. I'm certain of it. I'd washed everything the day I moved in. No dishes, no cups. Yet here it was, still warm to the touch, a faint ring of brown liquid at the bottom. I didn't drink coffee. Never have. I called Mrs. Hargrove. She sounded distracted when she answered. "Oh, yes, the house is yours alone," she said. "Just you. Has someone been there?" Her voice hitched slightly. "No," I lied. "Just checking." That lie felt heavy all day. That evening, I decided to test it. I set up my phone on the staircase, pointed down the hall, recording audio only. If there were sounds, I'd have proof. I went to bed early, pretending to sleep. Around 2:17 a.m., the recordings picked it up again. Voices, this time clearer. I listened back with headphones, curled under the covers like a child. "He doesn't remember," the deeper voice said. "Give him time," the higher one replied. "It always comes back." "Not this time. He's different." A pause. "We'll have to remind him." The recording ended there. My hands shook. I rewound it 3 times. The voices weren't distorted, weren't muffled by distance. They sounded like they were standing right beside the phone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I went to see my friend Lena. We'd known each other since college. She lived downtown, worked for a nonprofit, kept her hair in neat braids, and always smelled like lavender. I needed normalcy. I needed someone who knew me, who could anchor me to reality. "Hey," I said, hugging her at her door. "You look awful," she said gently. "Come in." We sat on her couch. I told her about the house, the voices, the coffee cup. She listened quietly, her expression shifting from concern to something more complicated. "Oh, God," she said finally, "you really don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "The conversation last week. You called me, frantic. Said something was happening in that house. You told me about the voices. You said you'd spoken to your mother." My blood turned to ice. "My mother? She's been gone 10 years, Mark." I stared at her. "I know that. Of course I know that." "Then why did you tell me she came to you in the hallway? That she said, 'You have to remember what you did'?" "I never said that." Lena blinked. "You did. I wrote it down because it scared me. You were crying. You kept saying, 'She knows what I did.' And I asked you what you did, and you just hung up." I stood up. That didn't happen. But she went to her desk and pulled out a small notebook. Flipped to a page dated 6 days ago. In her neat handwriting, Mark called. Hysterical. Said Mom visited. Mentioned what he did. Refused to explain. Worried. The date was before I'd even moved into the house. My stomach dropped. I wasn't even in West Hollow then. "You were," she said. You told me you'd found this cheap place, said it felt familiar. I left without another word. I called my brother next, Ben. We weren't close, but we kept in touch. Birthdays, holidays, occasional beers. "Hey," I said, forcing calm, "do you remember me calling you last week?" "Yeah," he said immediately. "You were freaking out about that old house. Said you'd heard Mom talking to you. I told you to get out of there, man. That place has a bad vibe." "I never called you." Silence. Then carefully, "Mark, you did. I have the call log. You left a voicemail, too, saying, 'I think I killed her.'" My breath caught. "What?" I didn't know what to say. I thought you meant figuratively, grief stuff, but you sounded unhinged. I hung up. Back at the house, I paced. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked hollow. Dark circles, pale skin, hair matted with sweat. I stared at it until it felt like it was staring back. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and notepad. If something was happening, I'd document it. I'd prove it was real, or prove I was losing my mind. At exactly 1:03 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged. The lights, already dim, flickered once, then died. The emergency bulb above the stove cast long, trembling shadows. And then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The steps stopped outside the kitchen door. The knob turned. The door opened. No one was there, but the air, it changed. It carried the scent of jasmine, my mother's perfume. She always wore it on Sundays. "Mark," a voice whispered. Hers. Clear as day, I couldn't speak. "You promised you'd remember." "I don't know what you're talking about," I choked out. "You left me there." "Where?" "Mom, I was 16 when you died. I was at school." "You came back." No, I didn't." "You came back," she repeated, firmer now. "You opened the door. You let them in." I stood, backing into the counter. Who? Who did I let in?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the hallway light flickered on by itself. Down the hall, the front door stood open. Moonlight spilled onto the rug. I ran upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and sat with my back against it until dawn. The next morning, I drove to the city archives. If my memories were failing, maybe records would help. I looked up the house on Elmwood Lane, West Hollow, built in 1923, owned by a family named Vey until 1989, then abandoned, then sold to a holding company, then nothing, until Mrs. Hargrove listed it. But I also looked up my own name, and there it was, a police report, dated 14 years ago, from this very address. Resident reported hearing voices. Mother found deceased in upstairs bedroom. No signs of forced entry. Son, Mark E., 16, interviewed. Claimed no memory of events. Ruled natural causes, though toxicology inconclusive. Natural causes? My mother died of a ruptured aneurysm at 42, in her sleep, in our apartment downtown. Not here. I showed the archivist the report. "This is wrong," I said. "My mom never lived here." The woman, older with wire-rimmed glasses, studied the file. That's odd. But the signature on the death certificate, that's your mother's maiden name, Eleanor Vey. Vey, the original owners. My head spun. Vey isn't her name. Her name was Riley. According to this, she was Eleanor Vey, married to Thomas Ellery. He died in 85. She lived here alone until 08. I left the archives shaking. I called Lena again. "What's my mom's full name?" "Eleanor Vey," she said without hesitation. You told me she kept her maiden name after your dad died." "No," I whispered. "Her name was Riley. Eleanor Riley." "Mark, are you sure?" "Yes. But when I called Ben, he said the same thing. Eleanor Vey always was." I went back to the house, against every instinct. I needed to understand. In the attic, behind a loose wall panel I hadn't noticed before, I found a box, old photographs, newspaper clippings, a journal. The photos showed a woman who looked like my mother, but not quite. Same eyes, same smile, but her hair was darker, her face sharper. In one, she stood on the porch of this very house, arm around a boy who looked like me but younger. The date on the back, October 12th, 2007. The journal was hers. "I think Mark is changing," she wrote. "He looks at me like he doesn't know me anymore. He calls me Mom, but his voice is flat. Last night, he asked who his father was. He used to talk about Thomas all the time." Thomas. Not my father. My real father was Robert Ellery, died when I was 5. But in this version, Thomas Vey was my dad. And then I found the last entry. He came home tonight, calm, too calm. He said, "I know what you did." I told him I didn't understand. He went upstairs. I heard the door to the attic open. Then silence. When I checked, he was gone. The window was open. I think he jumped. But when I ran outside, there was no body, only footprints leading back inside. The date, November 3rd, 2008. The day my mother died. But according to this, I died that day. And yet, here I am, unless I'm not. Unless I'm something else. That night, I didn't resist the voices. I went downstairs when they called. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The front door stood open again, but beyond it wasn't the porch. It was a dark forest, trees swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. My mother stood there in the same blue dress she wore the day she died. Only now her eyes were hollow, black. "You stayed away too long," she said. "I didn't know," I said. "You knew. You just forgot." "What did I do?" I asked. "You opened the door," she said. "You let the wrong thing in. And it took you. Left something wearing your skin behind." I looked down at my hands. They looked like mine. But were they? "You've been living someone else's life," she said. "A patchwork of borrowed memories. But this house remembers the truth, and it's time to give you back." "Give me back what?" "Yourself." She reached for me. I didn't pull away. The moment her fingers touched my wrist, the world fractured. Memories flooded in, not mine, not the ones I'd lived with for years, but real ones, sharp, painful, true. I remember coming home from school that day, finding the house quiet, going upstairs, seeing the shadow in my mother's room. It wasn't human. It had too many limbs, too many eyes. It whispered in a voice that wasn't a voice, and I ran, but not outside. I ran into the attic. I found the old mirror, the one covered in dust, the one my mother said never to touch, and I stepped through, not to escape, to replace. The thing that followed me, it needed a vessel. So I gave it mine. I pushed it into my skin, into my bones, into my mind, and I became the ghost, the watcher, the forgotten boy in the walls, but the house wouldn't let me go. It kept me tethered, waiting for the day the imitation would crack. And when it did, when the borrowed memories began to fray, the house summoned everyone I knew to remind me of the truth. Because the truth is this: I never left West Hollow. I never got a job in the city. I never had friends named Lena or Ben. I died here, and the thing wearing my face, it's been trying to become real. But now I remember. And as my mother pulls me into the forest, the real world beyond the veil, I feel my body dissolve, not into death, but into return. Behind me, in the house, the front door slams shut, and somewhere inside, something that looks like me wakes up screaming, realizing it's alone with a life that isn't its own. And the voices, they start again. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. My dreams are starting to replace my real memories. It began with the taste of strawberries, not the bland, watery supermarket kind I usually bought, but the sharp, sun-warmed burst of flavor from the wild patch behind my grandmother's house in Vermont. I hadn't been there since I was 12, yet, standing in my sterile kitchenette, pouring stale coffee into a chipped mug, I could taste them, vivid, real, the tiny seeds catching between my teeth, the juice running sticky down my chin. I hadn't eaten strawberries in months. The memory hit me with such force I dropped the mug. It shattered on the linoleum, brown liquid spreading like a stain. But the taste lingered, impossibly bright, long after the coffee smell faded. That was the first crack, small, dismissible, a nostalgic glitch. But the cracks widened. A week later, during a tedious Tuesday meeting about quarterly projections, I found myself staring at Dave from accounting's receding hairline and suddenly knew he had a third-floor apartment overlooking the river with a blue balcony. I'd never been to his apartment. I didn't even know he lived near the river. But the image was there. The peeling blue paint on the railing, the smell of damp concrete and exhaust, the sound of gulls crying. Later, in the break room, I mentioned it casually. "Nice place you got over the river, Dave. That blue balcony looks damp." His face went slack. "How did you—" "I just moved there last month. Haven't told anyone." The chill that went through me wasn't just embarrassment. It was the first true flicker of terror. That memory wasn't mine. It wasn't a dream I recalled. It had simply overwritten my knowledge of Dave, seamless and complete. Then came the dreams. Not the usual jumble of anxieties and forgotten faces, but hyper-real, coherent narratives that felt less like sleep and more like time spent elsewhere. In one, I was a lighthouse keeper on a jagged, storm-lashed island. I could feel the grit of salt on my skin, the tremor of the massive lens as it rotated, the specific ache in my lower back from hauling coal up the spiral stairs. I woke with the taste of brine on my lips and the phantom weight of a heavy brass key in my pocket. The next day, I found myself instinctively knowing the maintenance schedule for the old Maritime Museum downtown, a place I'd never visited. The details were precise, specific. The brand of oil used on the Fresnel lens replica, the exact squeak of the third stair on the tower access. The dreams bled into my waking hours faster, fragments, sensations, skills. I found myself humming a tune I'd never heard before, my fingers moving with unfamiliar dexterity over a guitar I didn't own. I knew the precise way to fold a paper crane, though I'd never learned origami. I recognized the constellations of the southern hemisphere, though I'd never left the northern latitudes. Each new dream layer felt richer, more real than my actual life, my cramped apartment, my data entry job, my solitary dinners eaten over reruns of shows I couldn't quite remember enjoying. The real memories started to fray at the edges. I'd reach for a memory, a birthday party, a first kiss, a conversation with my mother, and find it thinner, fainter, like an old photograph left in the sun. The colors bled, the details dissolved, the emotional weight evaporated. But the dream memories gained weight. They felt solid, textured, imbued with a significance my actual life lacked. The lighthouse keeper's loneliness felt more profound than my own. The taste of those wild strawberries more real than any meal I'd eaten in the last year. I tried to fight it. I started a journal, not digital, something tangible, something the dreams couldn't easily overwrite. Leather-bound, fountain pen. I wrote down everything I could remember about my real life, my street address, my mother's maiden name, the color of my first car, the name of my childhood best friend, the exact layout of my grandmother's house, the real one, not the dream version with the impossible strawberry patch. I wrote about mundane things, the brand of toothpaste I used, the route I took to work, the serial number on my laptop. Anchors. I kept the journal locked in a small safe bolted to the floor of my closet. The first time I opened it after a particularly vivid dream, a week spent as a botanical illustrator in a sun-drenched Parisian garret, sketching rare orchids. I felt sick. The entries were still there, but the handwriting, it was subtly different. The loops were tighter, the strokes more precise, more fluid. It was my hand, but honed, refined, like the hand of the illustrator, and the memories felt distant, like reading about a stranger. The taste of my real toothpaste was a vague concept, while the scent of the orchid ink from the dream was sharp and immediate in my nostrils. Worse, the safe itself felt alien. The cold metal, the click of the combination lock, it triggered a memory of a different safe, hidden behind a false panel in a library in Prague, filled with stolen maps. The Prague memory felt more real than the safe under my own fingers. I stopped opening the journal. The anchors were dragging me down, not holding me fast. The dream lives were brighter, more vivid, more meaningful. Why cling to the gray monotony of Eli Vance, data processor, when I could be Elara, the lighthouse keeper who spoke to the gulls? Or Matteo, the Parisian illustrator who knew the secret language of flowers? Their memories were clean, unburdened by the petty frustrations and quiet disappointments of my real existence. Their sorrows felt epic, their joys pure. My real life felt like a poorly written draft, while the dream lives were the final, polished manuscript. The replacement accelerated. I'd wake up and have to consciously remember my name, my address, my job. It took effort, like recalling a character from a book I'd read long ago, but the dream identity was immediate, effortless. I'd look in the mirror and see a flicker of Elara's sharp cheekbones beneath my own tired face, or Matteo's intense dark eyes staring back from my own pale blue ones. My reflection became a stranger wearing a mask I was slowly forgetting how to wear. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling like a banshee. I'd just woken from a dream so intense it left me breathless. I was a child again, but not my childhood. I was running through a moonlit forest, barefoot, the needle-strewn earth soft under my feet. I was chasing fireflies, their cold light winking through the ancient pines. I knew the name of every tree, the call of every night bird. I felt a profound, uncomplicated joy, a sense of belonging to the wild, dark world. I woke with tears on my cheeks, the phantom scent of pine resin and damp earth clinging to me. I stumbled to the bathroom, needing water, needing to ground myself in the harsh fluorescent light. I turned on the tap, splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up, the face in the mirror wasn't mine. It was the child from the dream. Wide, dark eyes filled with moonlight and wonder, framed by messy black hair. The face of a child who had never sat in a cubicle, never paid rent, never felt the gnawing emptiness of a life half lived. I screamed. The sound was raw, terrified. I slammed my fist against the mirror. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing out from the point of impact, but the child's face remained unharmed, looking back at me with an expression of gentle sorrow. "It's okay." The child's lips moved, though no sound came from the mirror. "The real world is just a dream you're forgetting. Come home." I backed away, tripping over the bath mat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling. I needed to call someone, Chloe, my sister, proof I existed. Proof this world was real. I dialed. It rang and rang and rang. Voicemail. Her cheerful message, "Hey, it's Chloe. Leave a MSG," sounded tinny, artificial, like a recording from another lifetime. I tried Mark from work. Same thing. My landlord, my therapist. All voicemail. All sounding increasingly distant. Their voices flat, devoid of the warmth I thought I remembered. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I ran to the closet, yanking open the safe. The journal lay inside. I grabbed it, flipping frantically to the first page. My anchors, my real life. The handwriting was completely different. Elegant flowing script, not mine, not Ilara's or Mateo's, older. The ink was faded, sepia-toned. The words weren't about data entry or toothpaste brands. They were about the forest, the fireflies, the names of the trees. The safe itself felt warm, like living wood, not cold metal. The lock clicked open with a soft, organic sigh. I sank to the floor, the journal heavy in my lap. The rain outside seemed to soften, becoming the gentle sigh of wind through pine needles. The hum of the city lights outside my window dimmed, replaced by the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The sterile smell of my apartment dissolved into the rich, loamy scent of the forest floor. The child's face in the broken mirror was gone. In its place was my own reflection, but transformed. My eyes were dark. My skin seemed to glow with an inner light, my hair tangled with leaves. I looked whole, at peace. The frantic, hollow ache that had been my constant companion for years was simply gone, replaced by a deep, resonant calm. I understood then the dreams weren't replacing my memories. They were correcting them. My real life, the apartment, the job, the loneliness, was the dream, the fragile, desperate fantasy of a soul lost in the wrong world. The forest, the lighthouse, the Parisian garret, those were the true memories. The echoes of who I was meant to be, bleeding through the thin veil of this false reality. The forgetting wasn't a loss, it was a shedding, like a snake sloughing off dead skin. I stood up, the journal fallen from my numb fingers. I walked to the window, not bothering to unlock it. I simply pushed. The glass didn't shatter. It dissolved like mist. Cool, damp air rushed in, smelling of pine and earth and freedom. Below, the rain-slicked street wasn't asphalt. It was a mossy path winding deep into the moon-dappled forest. Fireflies winked in the darkness, beckoning. I stepped onto the windowsill. The city sounds were gone. Only the forest remained, The whispers in the wind weren't my name anymore. They were a welcome, a homecoming. I looked back once at the empty apartment, the cracked mirror, the fallen journal, a life built on sand washing away. Then I stepped out into the night. The ground was soft beneath my bare feet. The air was alive, and the memories, my true memories, floated back to me like leaves returning to the tree. I remembered the taste of moonlight on my tongue, the language of the owls, the secret paths only the fireflies knew. I remembered who I was. The last vestige of Eli Vance's data processor dissolved like morning fog, and I walked into the trees, home at last, the real memories finally whole. With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. I moved into an apartment that remembered me better than I did. The listing was absurdly cheap for a 2-bedroom in the city. $750 a month, utilities included, immediate occupancy, no credit check. Scrawled on a torn piece of paper taped to a laundromat bulletin board. The address was a faded brick building on Willow Street. I'd walked past 100 times without noticing. A narrow 4-story walk-up, squeezed between a shuttered bakery and a 24-hour bodega. My savings were gone after the hospital bills. My old roommate had moved out without warning, leaving me stranded. When Mrs. Gable, the ancient super who smelled faintly of mothballs and answered the door in slippers despite the afternoon heat, handed me the keys without asking for ID or proof of income, I should have run. But the sheer impossible affordability felt like mercy. The brass keys were unnaturally warm in my palm. Apartment 3B smelled of lemon oil and dust. Sunlight streamed through tall, grimy windows, illuminating floating moats dancing above hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The layout was simple, a living room with a brick fireplace, non-functional, Mrs. Gable had warned, a tiny galley kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom with clawfoot tub. It was clean, starkly so. No lingering sense of previous tenants. No scratches on the floorboards. No nail holes in the plaster walls where pictures might have hung. It felt less like a lived-in space and more like a stage set waiting for actors. Mrs. Gable had muttered something about the last tenant leaving suddenly before shuffling back downstairs, her slippers whispering on the stairs. That first night, exhaustion overrode unease. I slept deeply in the larger bedroom, the unfamiliar silence of the city outside a lullaby. I woke just after dawn to the sound of rain against the window and a smell, not the damp earth smell of a spring storm. This was sharper, cleaner, the unmistakable scent of lemon oil. Stronger than when I'd arrived, it seemed to seep from the floorboards themselves, thick and cloying. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the apartment should have been. My breath fogged slightly in the air. As I swung my legs out of bed, my bare foot landed on something smooth and cool on the floor. Not a stray button or a loose coin, a small carved wooden horse, rough-hewn, sanded smooth by time, one ear chipped off. I'd never seen it before. I picked it up. It felt familiar in my hand. The weight, the grain of the wood. A flicker of memory surfaced. My grandfather's workshop, the smell of sawdust, his large hands guiding mine as I clumsily shaped a block of pine, but I'd never carved anything. I'd never met my grandfather. He died before I was born. I tucked the horse into my pocket, dismissing it as a forgotten toy left by the previous tenant. The lemon smell faded as the sun burned off the rain. The apartment began to whisper. Not with voices, with details. The thermostat in the hallway, an old dial type, was always set to 68 degrees when I woke, no matter how high I turned it the night before. I'd find the dial stubbornly reset, the brass cool under my fingertips. The kitchen cabinet above the sink, the one I never used, was always slightly ajar in the morning, revealing empty shelves that smelled faintly of vanilla. Mrs. Gable swore she cleaned it out completely. One evening, making tea, I opened a cupboard for a mug and froze. On the middle shelf, neatly arranged, were 3 mismatched teacups, one chipped white one with blue cornflowers, one thick ceramic mug stamped with the logo of a diner I'd never heard of, and one small, delicate porcelain cup painted with tiny yellow roses. My throat tightened. I hadn't bought these. I didn't own teacups. The yellow rose cup. I lifted it. The handle was worn smooth on one side. A memory hit me like a physical blow. Sitting at a sun-dappled kitchen table, sunlight catching dust motes, small hands wrapped around this very cup, the taste of weak, milky tea on my tongue, and a woman's voice, warm, low, singing a lullaby I couldn't quite place. My mother's voice. But my mother hadn't sung to me. She'd worked double shifts. This cup didn't exist in my life. I placed it back on the shelf with trembling hands, slammed the cupboard shut, and didn't open it again for days. Then came the cold spots. Not random drafts, specific places. A circle of icy air always hovered 3 feet from the closet door in the smaller bedroom. Another lingered near the fireplace mantel. Standing in them felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer, a deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. One rainy afternoon, seeking shelter from the damp chill outside, I sat on the living room floor near the fireplace, sketching in a notebook to distract myself. My hand strayed to the floorboards near the hearth. My fingers traced a faint, almost invisible groove in the wood, a groove shaped like a clumsy star carved with a pocket knife. I didn't remember carving it, but my body did. A phantom ache bloomed in my right shoulder, the exact spot where I'd fallen off my bike at age 8. Trying to impress a girl who moved away the next week. The memory was vivid. The crunch of gravel, the sting of torn knees, the smell of wet leaves. But I'd never fallen off a bike as a child. I'd been forbidden to ride them after a neighbor's accident. The cold spot near the mantel intensified, raising goosebumps on my arms. The lemon oil smell surged, thick and sharp, cutting through the dust. As I sat there shivering, the sketchbook in my lap, I drew the star on the floorboard without thinking. My hand moved with a certainty that wasn't mine. When I looked down, the drawing was perfect, identical. Below it, in a child's uneven scrawl I somehow recognized as my own childhood handwriting, I'd written, "Made this for Mama. She liked stars." Panic became a constant companion. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to the apartment breathe. The old pipes would groan, but beneath it, a softer sound, a rhythmic shush, shush, like someone gently rocking in the living room chair. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the faint, tinny melody of a music box drifting from the empty, smaller bedroom. A tune I almost knew, almost remembered. I'd creep to the door, heart pounding, and find the room dark and empty, the air frigid near the closet. The music would stop the moment I opened the door. During the day, objects would shift. The wooden horse would appear on the windowsill, then on the kitchen table, then tucked under my pillow. A small, smooth river stone I found on the bathroom sink one morning felt warm, as if held. It triggered a memory of kneeling on a sun-warmed bank, small fingers plunging into cool water, searching for the perfect skipping stone. A boy's laughter, echoing my laughter, but younger, freer. I had no childhood memories of a river. We'd lived in the city my whole life. I went to Mrs. Gable, found her in the basement, sorting laundry under a single bare bulb. The air smelled of damp concrete and detergent. I showed her the carved horse, the river stone, tried to explain the cold spots, the teacups, the impossible memories flooding in. She didn't look up from folding a worn flannel shirt. "Ah," she sighed, the sound like dry leaves scraping concrete. "It's remembering you. This building, it holds on to things, people, especially the ones who leave pieces of themselves behind." She finally met my eyes. Hers were milky with cataracts, but sharp. The last tenant in 3B, her name was Eleanor, lived here 63 years, came as a bride, left as a widow, carrying only a suitcase. She forgot to take the rest. Mrs. Gable's gnarled hand patted the flannel shirt she was folding. It was small, a child's shirt. Apartment remembers what people forget. Sometimes it tries to give it back. "Eleanor?" I whispered. "But I'm not Eleanor, I'm Daniel." Mrs. Gable just hummed, a low, tuneless sound, and went back to her folding. "It knows your name, Daniel. It knows the name you had before you were Daniel, the name only the walls remember." She didn't elaborate, just handed me a key to the building's old coal chute access, a dark, narrow space off the basement I was to use for trash until the compactor was fixed. "Sometimes," she murmured, not meeting my eyes, "the things it gives back aren't meant for the present. Be careful what you take from the dark places, boy." That night, the cold spot near the smaller bedroom closet was unbearable. It pulsed like a frozen heartbeat, radiating outwards until the entire room was icy. The lemon oil smell was overpowering, mixed with the scent of old paper and something sweetly floral, lilacs. Standing in the center of the chill, my breath pluming, the memories didn't just flicker, they flooded, not Daniel's memories, Eleanor's. I saw a young woman in a floral dress standing in this very spot, pinning a small boy's drawing to the closet door. A wobbly picture of a house, a son with a smiley face, 3 stick figures labeled Mama, Papa, and Leo. The boy, Leo, was my age, my face, but not Daniel's face, a different face, darker hair, a gap between his front teeth. I felt the scratch of the wool dress against my skin, felt the ache in my chest as I watched Leo run laughing down the hall, calling for his father, felt the crushing weight of the telegram that came a year later. PFC Leo Henderson, missing in action, presumed dead. Felt the slow erosion of hope, the years of waiting that turned to grief, the quiet life built in these rooms filled with the ghost of a son who never came home. The grief wasn't mine. It was a tsunami, drowning me in a sorrow I hadn't earned but couldn't deny. I fell to my knees, in the freezing air, sobbing for a child I'd never known, for a life I'd never lived. The wooden horse was clutched in my fist, the chip on its ear perfectly aligned with the memory of Leo's small hand, placing it in mine on his birthday the year before the war. I ran, not just from the room, from the apartment. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, stumbling down the stairs in the dark, not caring about the noise. I needed air, light, people. The bodega on the corner was open, fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and fried food, the murmur of voices, real, present things. I bought a coffee I didn't drink, sat by the window watching the rain-slicked street. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The carved horse was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, turning it over in the harsh light. The chip on the ear, Leo's laugh, the telegram, Eleanor's silent tears on the pillow for 50 years. It was all still there, vivid, raw. Daniel's life, the college degree, the office job, the quiet loneliness of the city felt like a thin veneer painted over something ancient and broken. When I finally climbed the stairs back to 3B hours later, dawn was bleeding gray light through the hallway window. The apartment was silent. The cold spots were gone. The lemon oil smell was faint, almost pleasant. On the kitchen table, where there had only been emptiness before, sat a small chipped white teacup with blue cornflowers. Steam curled gently from its rim. Next to it lay a single, perfect, deep purple lilac blossom. Fresh. Impossible. I hadn't seen lilacs blooming anywhere on this block. I sank into the chair. My body moved with a weary familiarity, as if this chair had held Eleanor's bones for decades. I lifted the cup. The warmth seeped into my palms. The tea inside was weak, milky, just how she liked it. I took a sip. The taste was alien on Daniel's tongue, but it unlocked a floodgate. Not just Leo. My mother, Eleanor's mother, humming that lullaby while stirring a pot on a stove that smelled of onions and thyme. The weight of my father's hand on my shoulder as we watched the sunset over a field I'd never seen, but whose scent of cut grass and wild strawberries filled my nostrils. The feel of Leo's small, trusting hand in mine the day we released his pet frog back into the creek behind the old house. The house this apartment had become after the war, after the grief forced them to downsize, to shrink their world to these four walls. Daniel's memories were still there, but they were faint, distant echoes. Eleanor's life was the tide pulling me under. I carried the cup to the living room window, looking out at the gray street below. The city was waking up. Cars hissed on wet pavement. A delivery truck rumbled past. Normal life, Daniel's life, but it felt like watching a movie through thick glass. The teacup trembled in my hand. The lilac on the table released another wave of scent, and with it came the final crushing memory, not of Leo's death, but of the day after the telegram came. Eleanor, 23 years old, standing in this very spot by the window, holding a small suitcase, her mother weeping on the sofa, her father's face like stone. "You can't stay here, Ellie," he'd said, his voice thick. "Every room, it screams with him. You need fresh air, a clean start, somewhere the walls don't remember." And Eleanor, hollowed out, had nodded. She'd packed one suitcase, left everything else, the furniture, the photos, the teacups, the carved toys, the memories soaked into the floorboards and plaster. She'd walked out the door, vowing never to look back, changing her name, burying Eleanor so deep it took 63 years and a desperate stranger named Daniel to wake her up. The apartment hadn't just remembered me. It had kept me. It had held Eleanor's grief, her love, her shattered heart, all these decades waiting for the only person it recognized, the only person whose bones had grown in its rooms, whose tears had watered its floorboards. Daniel was the key that unlocked the vault, but Eleanor was the treasure it had guarded. I set the teacup down carefully on the windowsill. The warmth from it lingered on my skin. I walked slowly to the smaller bedroom, the room that had been Leo's. The closet door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, hanging neatly on wire hangers, were clothes. Not Daniel's clothes. A woman's simple dresses in faded floral prints. A cardigan sweater, neatly mended at the elbow. On the shelf above, stacks of handkerchiefs, yellowed with age. And on the floor, tucked beside a pair of sensible shoes, was a small, worn suitcase. The latch was undone. The cold spot was gone. The air was still, warm even. The lemon oil smell was a gentle hum in the background. I knelt before the suitcase. My hands, Eleanor's hands, Daniel's hands, whose hands were they, trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside wasn't dust or forgotten junk. It was neatly folded. A child's blue sweater with a tiny frog embroidered on the chest, a small dog-eared book of nursery rhymes, a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon addressed in a familiar looping script to my dearest Leo, and on top a single smooth river stone, identical to the one I'd found in the bathroom, cool to the touch, real. I picked up the stone. The memory wasn't a flood this time. It was a single, clear image. Leo, maybe 5 years old, kneeling on that sun-warmed riverbank, holding this exact stone, his face turned up to mine. Eleanor's face, with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Look, Mama, it's magic. It holds the river song." He'd pressed it into my palm. "Keep it safe, so you never forget the happy days." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. Not Daniel's tears, Eleanor's tears, 63 years of them, finally released. I clutched the stone to my chest, the rough surface pressing into my skin. The suitcase wasn't an ending. It was an invitation, a homecoming. I closed the lid gently. The latch clicked softly. I carried the suitcase to the living room and placed it by the door. Not to leave, to stay. I went to the kitchen, washed out the chipped teacup, and placed it back on the shelf with the others. I arranged the lilac blossom in a small glass of water on the windowsill. The lemon oil smell deepened, warm and comforting now, like beeswax and old wood. The apartment sighed around me, a sound not of pipes or wind, but of relief, of recognition. I sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, the one that had whispered its rhythm in the night. The wood was smooth under my palms, worn by decades of Eleanor's hands. Outside, the city noises faded. The only sound was the soft shush-shush of the chair and the quiet hum of the walls. They didn't just remember me, they knew me, deeper than Daniel ever had. They held the parts of me I'd buried, the love, the grief, the joy, the child who'd loved a boy named Leo. The weight of Daniel's loneliness lifted, replaced by the profound, aching weight of a life fully lived, even in sorrow. The stone sat heavy and warm in my lap. I closed my eyes. The scent of lilacs and lemon oil filled my senses. The first notes of the music box drifted softly from the small bedroom, not tinny anymore, but clear, sweet, and achingly familiar. The lullaby my mother used to sing, the one only the walls remembered. I began to hum along, my voice rough at first, then stronger, joining the melody. The apartment held its breath. Then, softly, the walls began to hum back. I am Eleanor. I am here. I am home. The memories are not ghosts. They are mine. And I am not alone. I am not myself. I am the walls. I am the floor. I am the quiet song in the dark. The stone is warm. The chair rocks. The song goes on. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The winter I turned 34 was the winter the world went silent. It was a silence born of absence, a profound sound-dampening void left by the departure of my wife, Amelia. She hadn't died. She had just left, a quiet, bloodless coup, leaving me the sole deposed monarch of our small two-story suburban kingdom. The silence she left behind was a physical entity. It soaked into the drywall, it pooled in the corners of the rooms, and it muffled the outside world, turning the cheerful shouts of neighborhood children into distant, tinny echoes. My name is Samuel. I'm a cartographer, a man who makes his living drawing lines create an order from the chaos of geography. My work is precise, logical, and quiet. I had always thought I enjoyed the quiet. I was wrong. The quiet of our house, once a peaceful harbor, was now the vast, terrifying, and empty ocean. I was adrift. The neighborhood, Havenwood Hills, was a perfect self-contained diorama of suburban bliss. Mature oak trees, manicured lawns, and a prevailing sense of polite, unspoken conformity. It was a place where things were supposed to make sense, a place for summer barbecues, for autumn leaf raking, for the gentle, predictable rhythms of a life well lived. It was not a place for an ice cream truck in the dead of winter. The first time I saw it, it was a Tuesday in the bleak, iron-gray heart of January. A thick, wet snow was falling, the kind that clings to every branch and wire, swaddling the world in a thick white bandage. I was in my study, a room on the second floor that overlooked the gentle curve of our street, trying to lose myself in the intricate topography of a coastal estuary map. And then I heard it. It was a melody, a faint, tinny, music box jingle that was so profoundly out of place in the muffled, snowy silence that my mind initially refused to process it. It was "Pop Goes the Weasel." But it was wrong. It was slow, lugubrious, each note slightly off-key, as if the music box that was playing it was very old and very, very tired. The sound grew slowly, agonizingly, louder. I went to the window, my brow furrowed in confusion. And there it was, creeping down the center of the snow-covered street at a pace that was more funereal than festive, was an ice cream truck. It was a relic, a ghost from a bygone era, a vintage 1960s model with rounded, friendly-looking fenders and a high, curved roof. The paint was peeling in long pastel strips of what had once been cheerful pink and white, revealing a layer of rust that was the color of old, dried blood. On the side, in a faded, looping, and vaguely sinister script, were the words, "Jolly Jack's Joyful Gems." The cartoon caricature of Jolly Jack was the stuff of nightmares, a winking, ruddy-cheeked clown whose smile was too wide, whose eyes were just two black, empty circles. The truck moved with a strange, unnatural silence, the only sound the slow, melancholy dirge of its song. It left no tracks in the fresh snow. My first thought was that it was a prank, some art school prankster with a vintage truck and a twisted sense of humor. But as it drew nearer, I saw the other residents of Havenwood Hills begin to emerge from their warm, bright houses. They moved with a slow, shambling gait, their faces slack, their eyes empty and unfocused. They were dressed in their indoor clothes, pajamas, bathrobes, slippers, oblivious to the biting cold and the falling snow. They were like sleepwalkers, drawn from their homes by the truck's sad, hypnotic song. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a man who wouldn't step outside without his tweed jacket, was standing in his driveway in a thin silk dressing gown, a light dusting of snow already gathering on his bald head. The truck stopped directly in front of my house. A small sliding window on its side opened with a soft, scraping sound. A figure leaned out. It was a silhouette, a shape in the deep, shadowy interior of the truck. I couldn't make out a face, just the impression of a tall, thin man in an old-fashioned soda jerk hat. A single, pale, long-fingered hand rested on the counter. The neighbors formed a silent, orderly queue. One by one, they would step up to the window, murmur something, and the pale hand would dispense not an ice cream cone, but a small white paper-wrapped block. They would hand over no money. They would simply take the block, turn, and shuffle back to their houses, their faces still wearing the same blank, vacant expression. I watched, my own face pressed against the cold glass of the window until the last neighbor had been served. The sliding window scraped shut. The slow, sad music began its funereal march once more, and the truck continued its crawl down the street, disappearing into the swirling snow, leaving the pristine, trackless white street behind it. The next day, I tried to talk to Mr. Henderson as he was collecting his mail. "Did you see that ice cream truck yesterday?" I asked, my voice a little too loud, a little too eager. He looked at me. His eyes, which were usually so full of a wry, intelligent humor, seemed clouded, distant. "Truck?" he said, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "I don't think so, son. Not in this weather." He turned and walked back to his house, leaving me standing in the cold, the seeds of a profound and terrible dread beginning to sprout in my gut. The truck returned the next day, at the same time, in the twilight hour as the world turned from gray to black, and the next. It became a part of the winter landscape, a daily, impossible ritual. And every day my neighbors would perform their silent, somnambulistic pilgrimage. After a week of this, I began to notice a change in the neighborhood, a subtle, creeping decay. The Christmas lights, which had been left up in a cheerful, defiant stand against the winter gloom, were no longer being turned on. The lawns, once so meticulously kept, were becoming shaggy and unkempt beneath the snow. The people themselves seemed faded. Their smiles were a little more forced, their greetings a little more hollow. It was as if the color, the life, the very soul of Havenwood Hills was being slowly, methodically leached away. My journalistic instincts, a holdover from a brief pre-cartography career, took over. My fear was being eclipsed by a desperate need to understand. I began to research. I dug into the town's archives, sifting through microfiches of old newspapers, my eyes burning from the strain. I found him in an article from the summer of 1974. His name was Jack. Not Jolly Jack. Just Jack. He had been a beloved local figure, the original owner and driver of Jolly Jack's Joyful Gems. There was a picture of him, a kind-faced man with a sad smile, leaning out of the window of his brand-new ice cream truck. And then a second article from the winter of that same year, a tragedy. Jack's 8-year-old son, Bobby, had wandered off during a snowstorm and had never been found. He had been playing in the woods at the edge of the neighborhood and had simply vanished. The town had searched for weeks, but the snow had been too deep. They found nothing. Jack, the article said, was consumed by his grief. He had continued to drive his truck through the neighborhood day after day, long after the season had ended, his cheerful jingle becoming a familiar sad refrain in the winter quiet. He was looking for his son. He was hoping the familiar sound would guide him home. He had driven that route every day until his own death of what the paper called a broken heart a decade later. The truck, his rolling musical tombstone, had been sold for scrap, or so the article said. The knowledge was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The truck was not a prank. It was a ghost. It was the physical manifestation of a father's eternal, inconsolable grief, doomed to forever patrol the streets where his son was lost. And the driver was the ghost of a man who had never been able to say goodbye. But what was he selling? What were those little white blocks? I knew I had to get closer. The next evening, as the first sad notes of "Pop Goes the Weasel" drifted through the falling snow, I put on my coat and went outside. The cold was a physical shock, a sharp, clean slap in the face. I joined a silent, shuffling line of my neighbors. Standing among them was like standing in a graveyard. Their eyes were vacant, their breathing shallow. The air around them felt thin, depleted. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the window. The inside of the truck was a deep, impossible darkness, and the cold that emanated from it was not the cold of winter, but the deep, cellular, ancient cold of the grave. The pale, long-fingered hand of the driver rested on the counter. His face was a blur of shadow beneath his hat. "What would you like?" a voice whispered. It was not a real voice. It was a dry, rasping sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. I looked at the menu, a small hand-painted board inside the truck. The flavors were not chocolate or vanilla or strawberry. They were written in the same looping, faded script as the side of the truck. And they were a carefree summer afternoon, the pride of a first success, Christmas morning, age 6, a mother's embrace. I stared at the words, my mind reeling. This was not ice cream. This was something else. "What are they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Memories," the driver rasped. "Just a little taste, to help you forget the cold." My eyes scanned the list again, and my heart stopped. At the bottom of the board, one flavor was written in a slightly different, more recent hand. Amelia's laugh, a sound, a memory, a feeling that I had been chasing in my dreams for 6 agonizing months. The sound that had been the anchor of my life. The thought of hearing it again, of feeling the warmth of it, was a siren song so powerful, so seductive, that it drowned out all the alarm bells that were screaming in my head. "I'll have that one," I said, my voice a choked, desperate thing. The pale hand disappeared into the darkness and reemerged with one of the small paper-wrapped blocks. As I reached for it, his cold, dry fingers brushed against my own. It felt like touching a statue. I took the block. It was cold, but it wasn't the cold of ice. It was the cold of absence. I turned and walked back to my house, the small white block clutched in my hand. I felt the empty eyes of my neighbors on my back. I knew I had just crossed a threshold, that I had become a part of their silent, waking nightmare. Inside my house, I unwrapped the block. It was not ice cream. It was a smooth, white, almost translucent substance, like solidified moonlight. It had no smell. I sat in my armchair, the one Amelia had always loved, and I took a small, hesitant bite. The world dissolved. It was not a taste. It was a total sensory immersion. I was no longer in my silent, winter-bound house. I was in our old, sun-drenched garden, in the heart of a perfect July afternoon. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. I could smell the rich, loamy scent of the earth, the sweet perfume of the roses Amelia had planted, and I could hear her. She was laughing, a full-throated, joyous sound that was more beautiful than any music I'd ever heard. She was holding a watering can, a single perfect drop of water clinging to the tip of her nose. The memory was not a memory. It was real. It was perfect. I was there. The experience lasted for what felt like an eternity, and for what was probably only 30 seconds. When it faded, and I was back in my cold, silent living room, the afterglow was so powerful, so euphoric, that I was weeping with a joy so profound it was almost painful. The little white block in my hand was almost gone, melted away into nothing. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced, and it was the beginning of my end. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange, hollow sensation. The euphoria of the memory was gone, replaced by a gray, aching void. I went to make coffee, and I found myself staring at the coffee maker, a simple drip machine we had owned for years, and I couldn't remember how to use it. The knowledge was just gone. A small, simple, and utterly mundane memory erased. I stood there for a long time, a new, different kind of cold seeping into my bones. The price. The transaction had not been free. I had bought a taste of a perfect memory, and the price had been one of my own. I knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty, what was happening to my neighbors. They were trading their lives piece by piece, memory by mundane memory, for the euphoric, nostalgic poison of the ice cream truck. They were hollowing themselves out, becoming empty, silent vessels, their pasts consumed, leaving only the blank, placid present. I should have stopped. I should have thrown the rest of the block away and boarded up my windows and never gone outside again. But I was an addict, and the grief for Amelia was a disease for which that little white block was the only cure. I went back the next night, and the next. I traded the memory of my first grade teacher's name for the feeling of Amelia's hand in mine on our first date. I traded the memory of how to tie a Windsor knot for the smell of her hair on our wedding day. I was systematically dismantling my own history, one cherished, perfect, and utterly false memory at a time. My own life was becoming a blur, a collection of disconnected moments, and the only things that felt real were the ones I was buying from the ghost in the truck. My world grew smaller. I stopped working. The lines on my maps became meaningless squiggles. The only geography that mattered was the 20-yard stretch of frozen lawn between my front door and the curb. It was my neighbor's little girl, a bright 7-year-old named Chloe, who finally broke through my self-induced haze. I saw her from my window, standing in her own yard, building a snowman, and I was struck by a sudden, jarring thought. She was the only child I ever saw outside anymore. The other children of Havenwood Hills were gone, or at least they were no longer visible. And then I saw the truck beginning its slow daily crawl down the street. And I saw Chloe's mother come out of the house, her face wearing the same slack, empty expression as all the others. She took Chloe by the hand and began to lead her towards the street, towards the truck. A primal, protective instinct, an instinct I thought had been eroded away with all my other memories, roared to life inside me. The truck didn't just take memories from the past, it was taking the future too. It was taking the children. I ran out of my house, not even stopping to put on a coat, my bare feet burning on the frozen snow. "No!" I screamed, my voice a raw, ragged thing. "Stay away from her!" Chloe's mother didn't even look at me. She just continued her slow, inexorable march towards the siren song of the truck. But the driver, the shadowy figure of Jolly Jack, turned his head, and for the first time I felt his full, focused attention on me. It was a wave of pure, glacial cold, a malevolent, possessive hatred. He was not just a sad, grieving ghost. He was a predator, and I was interfering with his hunt. I knew I had to stop him, not just for Chloe, but for the entire hollowed-out, silent town. But how do you fight a ghost? How do you kill a memory? The answer, I realized, was in the transaction itself. The truck traded in nostalgia, in the beautiful, edited, perfect versions of the past. It fed on the sweet, saccharine gloss of memory. It had never occurred to me to ask for anything else. That night, I was the first in line. The truck pulled up, its sad song cutting through the frigid air. The window scraped open. The pale hand rested on the counter. "What would you like?" the dead-leaf voice whispered. I looked the shadowy figure in the eye. "I want a new flavor," I said, my own voice steady, resonant with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The figure was still. The hand did not move. "I want the memory of the night Bobby was lost," I said, the words hanging like icicles in the cold air. "I want to taste the fear, the cold, the grief, the real, ugly, unedited truth of it, not the sad story. I want the moment itself." The shadowy figure recoiled, as if struck. A low, guttural moan, a sound of pure agony, emanated from the dark interior of the truck. The pale hand twitched, spasmed on the counter. The truck fed on nostalgia, on the comfort of a lie. I was offering it the one thing it could not digest, the raw, indigestible, and agonizing truth. "Give it to me," I commanded, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "You owe it to him. You owe it to them all." The figure let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound that seemed to pull the very heat from the air. The pale hand disappeared and re-emerged with a block. But this one was not white. It was a dark, swirling, angry gray, and it seemed to throb with a cold, internal light. I took it. It was so cold it burned my hand. I unwrapped it, and I took a bite. The world did not dissolve. It shattered. I was not in a memory. I was in the event. I was a small 8-year-old boy lost in a blizzard, the wind a screaming predatory thing, the snow a blinding white abyss. I could feel the biting, numbing cold in my bones, the terror of being small and alone and lost in the dark. I could feel a father's frantic, heart-shattering grief, a grief so powerful it had torn a hole in the fabric of the world. I was experiencing the raw, unfiltered agony that had given birth to this monster. And in the heart of that storm of pain, I felt something else. A small, quiet, and profoundly powerful warmth. It was the memory of a father's love for his son, the love that had existed before the grief had twisted it into this monstrous, hungry thing. It was the original memory, the source code. I opened my eyes. I was back on the street, on my knees in the snow. The block was gone. The ice cream truck was changing. The cheerful, peeling paint was dissolving into a cloud of black, swirling smoke. The metal was groaning, rusting, decaying before my very eyes. The sad, melancholy jingle was distorting, rising in pitch until it was a single, agonized electronic shriek. The figure of Jolly Jack was visible now, not as a shadow, but as a man made of pure, shimmering grief, his face a mask of eternal, unending sorrow. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw not a monster, but a man, a father. And his eyes, for the first time, were not empty. They were full of a terrible and finally liberating peace. And then, with a final silent implosion, the truck, the driver, the sad eternal music were gone. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of peace. The neighbors, who had been standing in their silent zombie-like line, began to stir, to blink, as if wakened from a long, dreamless sleep. They looked at each other, a dawning confusion and shame on their faces. Mr. Henderson looked down at his silk dressing gown, a look of profound comical bewilderment on his face. The next day, the color began to return to Havenwood Hills. The Christmas lights were turned back on. The sound of children's laughter, real, joyous, and loud, echoed through the streets. The world was slowly, tentatively waking up. They would not remember what had happened. They would only have a strange, shared amnesia, a collective missing season in the story of their lives. But I remember. I carried a memory for all of them. The grief for Amelia is still with me, a quiet, constant companion, but it is my own. It is not a thing to be traded or erased or consumed. It is a part of my story. The winter is just winter now. It is cold and it is quiet. But it is a real quiet, a natural quiet. And when the snow falls, I no longer see ghosts. I just see the snow. And I know that spring, in its own slow and beautifully, wonderfully predictable time, will eventually come. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. I answered a roommate ad, and they'd been waiting for me since 1998. The ad was pinned to the community board at the all-night laundromat, tucked between flyers for lost cats and guitar lessons, faded newsprint, typewriter font, the paper brittle at the edges. Room for rent, quiet professional, $300 a month, utilities included, no pets, must appreciate history. Call Martin, 5555-0198. The number was handwritten below, the ink slightly smudged, as if written with a trembling hand. The price was impossible. A steal for a 2-bedroom apartment in the city, even in this neighborhood. My savings had evaporated after the layoff, and the friend's couch I'd been crashing on smelled permanently of stale beer and regret. I called from the payphone outside, the receiver cold against my ear. A man answered on the first ring. His voice was soft, precise, with a cadence that felt decades out of step. Martin speaking. I mumbled something about the ad. He didn't ask for references, didn't want to meet first, just gave an address on Elm Street and said, "Come tonight, after dark. I'll be waiting." The building was a narrow 3-story brick townhouse, squeezed between a shuttered bookstore and a bodega that glowed neon under the streetlights. Paint peeled from the window frames like sunburnt skin. The front door was heavy oak, scarred and dark. I knocked. It opened before my knuckles left the wood. Martin stood there, late 50s maybe, with neatly combed silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and suspenders. No smile, no handshake. Just a slow, appraising look that lingered on my face a beat too long. "You're on time," he said. His voice matched the phone call, soft, measured, with a faint tremor underneath. "Come in. Mind the threshold. It's uneven." He stepped back, gesturing me into a dimly lit foyer. The air was still and cool, smelling of lemon oil, old paper, and something else. Dry, like attic dust and dried flowers. The hallway floorboards were bare, worn smooth by time. No coats on the hooks, no shoes by the door. Just silence, thick as velvet. He led me through the foyer into a living room frozen in time. Plaid armchairs, a heavy wooden coffee table with a doily beneath a glass ashtray full of cold, dead cigarette butts. A cathode ray TV sat silent in the corner, its screen dark. Framed photos lined the walls, black and white snapshots of stern-faced people, color prints of stiff family gatherings under cloudy skies. All dated, all from another era. The only sound was the rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. "Your room is upstairs," Martin said, not looking at me. He gestured toward a narrow staircase. "The other bedroom is occupied by my wife Clara. She's resting. She doesn't like disturbances after sunset." He paused, his eyes fixing on mine behind those wire rims. "You look tired, like you've been traveling a long way." I hadn't mentioned where I'd come from. "Just busy day," I mumbled, shifting my duffel bag. The weight of it suddenly felt insignificant, like I'd packed the wrong life. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something only he understood. "Clara always said the right person would find us when the time was right. She believed in signs." He turned and walked to the foot of the stairs, his polished shoes making no sound on the wood. "Follow me!" The second floor was colder. The hallway carpet was thin, patterned with faded roses. Martin stopped at the first door on the left. "This will be yours." He opened it. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed with a thin mattress, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a window overlooking a tangled backyard garden. Moonlight filtered through the grimy glass, painting stripes on the bare floorboards. It smelled faintly of camphor and mothballs. Acceptable, affordable. Desperation made me ignore the chill in the air, the way the shadows in the corners seemed unnaturally deep. "The bathroom is at the end of the hall," Martin said, his voice barely above the clock's tick-tock, drifting up from below. "Clara uses the one downstairs. She prefers it." He handed me a heavy brass key. It was unnaturally cold. "Lock your door at night, for privacy and for safety." His gaze drifted past me, down the dark hallway toward the other bedroom. "Clara gets restless sometimes. She doesn't mean any harm. She's just waiting." "For what?" I asked, the words out before I could stop them. Martin's lips tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile. "For him to come home. For David." He turned away, his footsteps silent on the stairs. "Make yourself comfortable. Dinner is at 7. Clara always sets an extra plate." I dropped my bag on a bed. The springs groaned. I explored the room, opening the dresser drawers. Empty. The closet held a single wire hanger. On the windowsill, half hidden by dust, lay a small, smooth river stone. I picked it up. It felt warm, familiar. A flicker of memory surfaced. Kneeling on a sun-warmed bank, small hands searching for the perfect skipping stone, a boy's laughter echoing. But I'd grown up in the city. There were no rivers. I put the stone back, unease prickling my neck. At 6:58 p.m., I walked downstairs. The living room was empty. The grandfather clock read 6:59. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I stood by the cold fireplace, listening to the silence. At exactly 7, the kitchen door swung open. Martin stood there, holding a tray. Steam rose from 2 bowls of soup. Behind him, in the dim kitchen light, sat a woman, Clara. She was petite, with fine white hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a floral house dress that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her face was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes, when they lifted to mine, were a startlingly clear blue, but utterly devoid of warmth. Empty, like polished stones. She didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared. "David," she said softly. Her voice was a dry whisper, like pages turning in an old book. "You're late for dinner." My blood turned to ice. I'm not David," I stammered. "My name is Jamie." Clara tilted her head, a slow, bird-like movement. Her gaze didn't waver. David always liked his soup hot, just like his father. She turned back to her bowl, stirring slowly with a spoon. Martin placed my bowl on the table. Cream of mushroom. It smelled rich, homey, wrong. "Clara gets confused sometimes," Martin murmured, his voice tight. Since he left. Sit, eat. It's getting cold." He didn't correct her. He just watched me with those steady, unnerving eyes. I sat. The soup was perfect, but every spoonful tasted like ash. Clara ate in silence, her movements precise, mechanical. She kept glancing at the empty chair beside her, the one set for David. Once, she reached out and straightened the napkin on that plate, her fingers brushing the edge of the chair as if expecting a knee beneath it. The grandfather clock's tick-tock filled the silence, each beat echoing in my skull. Tick-tock, tick-tock, like a countdown. After dinner, Martin cleared the dishes without a word. Clara remained at the table, staring at the empty chair. I mumbled an excuse and fled upstairs, locking my door with the cold brass key. The room felt safer. I unpacked my few things, trying to shake the image of Clara's empty blue eyes. As I hung a shirt in the closet, my fingers brushed against something behind the hanger, a small, cloth-bound book, a diary. I pulled it out. The cover was worn soft, embossed on the front, in peeling gold letters, David Miller, 1998. My hand shook as I opened it. The pages were filled with neat Lupin handwriting, dated entries, January 15th, 1998. Got the job at the bank. Told Dad I'm moving out in June. He wasn't happy. February 3rd, 1998. Clara made my favorite pie. Apple. She cried when I said I wasn't coming back after college. April 12th, 1998. Met Jamie today at the library, studying architecture. He has the kindest eyes. We talked for hours. I think he likes me too. My breath caught. Jamie, my name. But I'd never been to this city in 1998. I'd been 16, living 3 states away. This was impossible. May 20th, 1998. Last night with Jamie. We walked by the river. He gave me this smooth stone, said it held the river's song. I'll keep it safe. He's leaving tomorrow for his internship. He promised to write. I promised to wait. June 1st, 1998. No letter yet. Dad says I'm wasting my time. Clara worries. I know he'll come back. He promised. June 15th, 1998. Still no word. Called his dorm. They said he transferred. No forwarding address. Clara found me crying in the garden. She held me. Said some promises aren't meant to be kept. June 30th, 1998. I packed my things today. Dad's right. I have to move on, but I can't leave this house. Not yet. Not without knowing. Clara says I can stay as long as I need. She says the house remembers. She says it will bring him back when it's ready. The final entry was smudged, the ink blurred as if by tears. July 4th, 1998. He never came back. I heard the car stop outside last night. I ran to the window, but it was just Mr. Henderson's old Buick. Clara says I imagined it. She says time heals, but the stone is cold now. The river's song is gone. I think I'm broken. I think I'll stay here, where he might still find me. The house won't let me forget. It hums with his name. Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. I dropped the diary. It landed with a soft thud on the floorboards. The river stone. Clara's empty eyes calling me David. Martin's cold key. The date on the ad, 5555, on 8 o'clock, 1998. The pieces crashed together with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a roommate situation. This was a tomb, a waiting room. They weren't looking for a roommate. They were waiting for David's ghost. And somehow, impossibly, they thought I was him, or that I could be him. A floorboard creaked outside my door, soft, deliberate, not Martin's silent tread. I held my breath. The doorknob turned slowly. The lock held. A pause. Then a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind. "David, are you awake? Clara made cookies. Your favorite." It was Clara's voice, stripped of its earlier emptiness, filled with a desperate, trembling hope. I didn't answer, didn't move. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence returned, heavier than before. I waited until the faint shuffle of slippers faded down the hall before unlocking the door and stepping out. The hallway was dark. The grandfather clock downstairs struck 10. Bong, bong, bong. The sound vibrated in my bones. I crept to the top of the stairs. The living room light was off, but moonlight streamed through the front window, illuminating the staircase landing. On the bottom step sat Clara. She wasn't looking at the stairs. She was looking up, directly at me. Her face was in shadow, but her eyes caught the moonlight, reflecting it like an animal's, unblinking. "David," she breathed. The word wasn't a question. It was a sigh of relief, a homecoming. "You came back." She held out a small lace-covered plate. On it sat 2 perfect oatmeal raisin cookies. "I knew you would. The house told me. It's been humming your name all day." I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm not David," I whispered, my voice raw. "My name is Jamie." Clara's hand lowered. The plate didn't waver. "Jamie?" she repeated softly. The name hung in the air, heavy with meaning. That's what he called himself when he forgot, before the accident. She stood up, smooth and silent. He forgot so many things after the car crash. His name, his mother's face, how to tie his shoes. But he remembered me. He remembered this house. Clara always waits. She took a step up the stairs. The moonlight caught the tears glistening on her cheeks. "You came back to us, Jamie. You finally came home." The world tilted. The grandfather clock's tick-tock became a roar in my ears. The smell of lemon oil and dust thickened, mixed with the scent of rain on hot asphalt, the sharp tang of spilled gasoline, the blinding white light of headlights in the dark, memories that weren't mine flooding in, vivid and terrifying. A screech of tires, shattering glass, a boy's voice screaming my name, "Jamie," before everything went black. David's memories, David's death, David's forgotten life. I stumbled back into my room, slamming the door and jamming the cold brass key into the lock. I leaned against the wood, gasping. The diary lay on the floor. I picked it up, flipping frantically to the last page. Beneath the smudged July 4th entry, in a different ink, shaky and desperate, was a new line added recently. He will return. The house remembers what he forgot. It will bring him back. We will wait. Clara and Martin. We will wait. A knock on the door. Soft, insistent. "Jamie?" Martin's voice, low and calm. "Open the door. Clara is upset. She's been waiting 26 years for you to come home. Don't make her wait longer. The house won't allow it." The lock felt flimsy, the brass key cold in my sweat-slicked palm. I looked around the room. The narrow bed, the cracked mirror, the window overlooking the dark garden. There was no escape. The air grew thick, pressing in, smelling of lemon oil and dried flowers and something metallic, like blood long dried. The tick-tock of the clock downstairs slowed, each beat stretching longer, heavier. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time itself was unraveling. Another knock, harder. The wood shuddered. "Jamie?" Clara whispered, her voice seeping under the door. "Let us in. Let us help you remember. We have your things. Your favorite sweater, the photo album, the stone from the river, everything you left behind." I sank to the floor, the diary clutched to my chest. The words blurred. David's handwriting bled into my own memories. My mother's face. Was it hers? Or David's mother's? My first car, the dented Honda, or David's blue pickup? The accident, the rainy highway, the truck swerving, the impact. But whose hands were on the wheel? Whose life flashed before whose eyes? The lines dissolved. Jamie and David weren't two people. They were one fractured soul, shattered by a crash in 1998, scattered across time, and the house had gathered the pieces. It had waited, patient, hungry, knowing the missing piece would eventually wander back, drawn by the hum in the walls, the pull of the river stone, the scent of oatmeal cookies in the dark. The doorknob rattled violently, the lock groaned, wood splintered near the latch. Clara's whisper became a hiss, thin and desperate. "You are him. You always were. The house knows. I know. Let us in, Jamie. Let us. Put you back together." I didn't reach for the key. I didn't try to bar the door. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a profound, icy calm. The memories weren't invasions. They were homecomings. The boy by the river, the smell of Clara's apple pie, Martin's hand on my shoulder the day I got the bank job, the weight of the smooth stone in my pocket, the blinding headlights, the silence after the crash, the long, slow forgetting. The house hadn't stolen my identity. It had remembered it for me. All of it. The joy, the grief, the boy who never came home. The lock gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open slowly. Clara stood there, backlit by the moonlight from the hall. She wasn't crying anymore. Her blue eyes held a deep, quiet certainty. Behind her, Martin waited, his face unreadable in the shadows. Clara held out her hand. Not the plate of cookies, the small, smooth river stone. It glowed faintly in her palm, warm and alive. "Come home, Jamie," she said, softly. "It's time." I stood up. My legs felt steady. I took the stone. It fit perfectly in my palm. The weight, familiar, comforting. The river's song hummed up my arm, clear and cold. I looked at Martin, at Clara, at the hallway stretching toward the stairs, toward the living room, toward the life I'd forgotten. The grandfather clock struck midnight. Bong, bong, bong. The sound didn't fade. It deepened, vibrating in the floorboards, in the walls, in my bones. The house was awake. It was welcoming me back. I stepped forward, past Clara, past Martin, down the stairs. The living room looked different in the moonlight, warmer, lived in. The doilies on the tables were bright white. The ashtray was empty. The photos on the walls held color I hadn't seen before. David's smile wide and unburdened, Clara's eyes sparkling, Martin younger, his hand on David's shoulder. I walked to the chair by the cold fireplace, the one Clara had set a place for. I sat down. The leather was soft under me, familiar. Clara followed, placing the plate of cookies on the coffee table. Martin brought a steaming mug of tea. They didn't speak. They just sat. Clara in her armchair, knitting needles clicking softly. Martin in the other chair, reading a newspaper dated June 15th, 1998. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Normal. Peaceful. I picked up a cookie. Oatmeal raisin, my favorite. The taste exploded on my tongue. Sweet, chewy, warm. A memory surfaced, clear and bright. Clara teaching me to bake in this very kitchen, flour dust in her nose, laughing as I burned the first batch. Patience, David, she'd said. Good things take time. David, Jamie. The names blurred, then merged. I was David. I was Jamie. I was the boy who loved the river, the boy who forgot, the boy who was remembered. I sipped the tea, Earl Grey, just how I liked it. The steam warmed my face. Outside, the city sounds faded. All I heard was the clock. Clara's knitting needles, the rustle of Martin's newspaper. The hum in the walls wasn't eerie anymore. It was a lullaby, a welcome home. I looked down at the river stone in my hand. It glowed softly in the moonlight. I closed my fingers around it. The house sighed around me, a deep, contented sound in the floorboards. Clara's knitting needles paused. She looked up, her blue eyes meeting mine. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, not empty, not desperate, filled with a love that had waited 26 years to be seen. "Welcome home, Jamie," she whispered. I smiled back. The name felt right. It always had. I took another bite of the cookie. The river's song hummed in my veins. The clock ticked. The house held its breath. And I finally remembered. I am home. I have always been home. The waiting is over. The stone is warm. The tea is hot. Clara's smile is real, and I will never leave again. The house won't let me. It never did. It just waited. It always waits for the boy who forgets, for the boy who remembers, for the boy who comes home. I am Jamie. I am David. I am the river's song. I am the stone. I am the house. I am home forever. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. I found notes in my handwriting hidden all over my house. I don't remember writing them. The first one was taped under the kitchen sink. I found it while hunting for a wrench to fix the leaky faucet. Mrs. Gable's ancient pipes groaning like arthritic bones every time I ran the tap. It was a small square of lined notebook paper, folded neatly, the edges softened with age. My own handwriting stared back at me in familiar blue ink. Check the crawl space for spiders before winter. I frowned. I'd never written that. I barely knew what a crawl space was. I crumpled it, tossed it in the trash, and forgot it. Stress, I told myself. Too many late nights at the data entry job, the fluorescent lights humming like angry wasps, my brain glitching from the monotony. I'd lived alone since Clara left 18 months ago, and solitude had a way of making your thoughts echo strangely in empty rooms. 3 days later, I found another, tucked behind the flour canister in the pantry, where no one would look unless desperate for baking powder. Same paper, same ink. The third floorboard near the window squeaks loudest at 3:17 a.m. Don't ignore it. My breath hitched. I'd moved into this creaking Victorian on Sycamore Street for cheap rent and quiet. A fresh start after Clara walked out, taking our dog and the last shreds of my confidence. But I'd never been on the third floor. The realtor, Mr. Finch, had warned me it was structurally unsound, sealing it off with a padlocked door at the top of the narrow stairs. I hadn't questioned it. The rent was $350 a month, including utilities, a miracle in this city. I burned the note in a sink, watching the edges curl black. My hands didn't shake, not yet. The third note appeared inside my toothpaste tube. I squeezed minty paste onto my brush one Tuesday morning and felt the crinkle of paper. Unrolled, it read, "Clara didn't leave you. You let her go. Remember the ferry ticket?" Ice flooded my veins. Clara. Hedon's left me. I'd packed her suitcases myself after the fight about the job offer in Seattle. Her dream job, not mine. But a ferry ticket? We'd never taken a ferry together. I'd booked her a flight. I'd dug through my old shoebox of memorabilia, boarding passes, movie stubs, a dried rose from our first date. No ferry ticket, just the note in my unmistakable scrawl, the wire in you, dotted with that tiny, deliberate circle I always used. I locked it in my desk drawer. That night, I slept with the lights on. They multiplied. A sticky note under the driver's seat of my rust bucket Honda. The brakes will fail on Elm Street Hill. Pump them gently. I tested the brakes obsessively for a week. They held, a scrap of paper folded into a library book I'd just checked out. Mrs. Gable's cat isn't hers. It followed you home from the bus stop on October 12th. I'd adopted Mittens from the shelter 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Gable from the laundromat downstairs had cooed over him, but she was allergic. I watched Mittens that night. He sat by the window, tail twitching, staring at the street lamp as if waiting for someone. At 2:03 a.m., he let out a low, guttural yowl that wasn't feline at all, a sound like stone grinding on stone, and I threw the note away, heart pounding. The worst was the one in the freezer. I'd bought a tub of cheap ice cream to numb the silence, and as I scooped, my spoon hit something hard. Wrapped in plastic, frozen solid. She's buried under the azaleas. You dug at midnight. You were crying. You forgot. Clara wasn't buried anywhere. She was living in Seattle, texting me birthday wishes with stiff politeness, but our backyard had azaleas. Thick, thorny bushes Mr. Finch insisted I prune. My hands were stained with dirt when I finished. I'd pruned them twice that week. I'd even cried alone in the overgrown yard, the scent of blossoms thick in the humid air. But I hadn't dug. I hadn't buried anything. I washed the note under hot water until the ink bled into blue ghosts on the paper. I stopped trusting my home. I bought a notebook, thick, leather-bound, and started documenting everything. October 21st. Found note in teapot. The basement door unlatches itself when you're asleep. Check the lock. I drew sketches of the notes, copied the handwriting exactly. My therapist, Dr. Evans, listened patiently. "Dissociation," she said gently. "Your mind's protecting you from the trauma of the breakup, creating narratives to explain the loneliness." She adjusted my antidepressants. I didn't tell her about the teapot note. 2 days later, I found my leather journal open on the kitchen table. New writing covered the page I'd left blank that morning, my handwriting, but jagged, frantic. "She doesn't believe you. No one will. They think you're broken. But I remember the hole. I remember the trowel in your hand. I remember the way the dirt felt like forgiveness. I called in sick to work. I tore the house apart. Not just obvious places, drawers, cupboards, but behind the bathroom tiles. A damp note curling in the grout. The tiles are loose because you kicked them that night. Under the loose floorboard in the hallway, a note on yellowed paper. You hid your father's watch here after the funeral. You were 8. You stole it from his pocket. Even inside the sealed bag of dog food. Mittens watched me with unblinking green eyes as I dumped kibble onto the floor. He knows your secrets. He was there when you dug. Every note was in my hand. Every fact was wrong. I didn't steal my father's watch. He'd given it to me on his deathbed. I'd never kicked the tiles. But the watch was missing. I'd looked for it for years. Mr. Finch came when I called, his face tight under his moth-eaten cap. "Trouble with the plumbing?" he asked, eyeing the upturned floorboards. I showed him the notes. He paled. "Burn them," he rasped. "All of them. Don't read them." When I pressed him, he gripped my arm, his fingers cold as pipes. "The last tenant, she wrote things too. Sweet girl, quiet. Started finding notes in her cereal box, her pillowcase. Said they were hers, but she didn't remember writing them." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "She left in the middle of the night, left her cat, left everything." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a list of repair requests I'd never written. At the bottom, in fresh ink, "Finch knows about the hole. He watched you dig." Finch snatched it back, his knuckles white. "This house, it remembers things," he whispered. "Things people forget. It gives them back. But twisted." He left without fixing the leak. That night, the power went out. Not just my house. The whole block went dark. I lit candles, their flames trembling in the sudden silence. Mittens vanished. From the attic, sealed, forbidden, came a slow, deliberate scratching. Scritch, 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 like fingernails on wood. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a candle. The scratching stopped. In the gloom, a whisper seemed to coil from the floorboards. "Come upstairs. See what you buried?" It was my voice, but lower, colder. I ran. Out the front door, down Sycamore Street, the wet pavement gleaming under the distant streetlights flickering back to life. I didn't stop until I reached the all-night diner, sliding into a cracked vinyl booth. Darlene, the waitress with tired eyes, brought coffee without asking. "Rough night, hun?" I nodded, unable to speak. I pulled out my phone to call Dr. Evans. The screen lit up, displaying a new note, typed in my own notes app despite the dead battery. Darlene's husband didn't leave her. "You told him about the affair. You saw her kissing the mechanic behind the garage. You wrote the anonymous letter." I looked up. Darlene was watching me, her expression unreadable. "You okay, sugar? You look like you seen a ghost." Her hand trembled slightly as she refilled my cup. I mumbled an excuse and fled again. Dawn found me at the public library, hunched over a microfiche machine, searching old property records. The house on Sycamore Street, built in 1893, owned by a woman named Eleanor Vey from 1947 to 1972. Died alone, no family. The records noted structural modifications in 1968, a new crawl space, reinforced basement walls, and a police report, redacted but visible. Disturbance call. Tenant reported voices in the walls. No evidence found. I dug deeper, fingers numb. Eleanor Vey had been a secretary, quiet, kept to herself, until the note started. The librarian, an old man with ink-stained fingers, leaned over. "Heard about her," he murmured. "Wrote warnings to herself, in her own hand. Said the house was filling in the blanks of her memory with other things." He tapped the microfiche. "They found her in the crawl space, scribbling on the walls with her fingernails." Over and over. I didn't forget. I I didn't forget. I didn't forget. I returned home at dusk. The house loomed, windows dark. Mittens waited on the porch, tail stiff. Inside, every light was on, and on every surface, every mirror, every window pane, every appliance, notes were taped, hundreds of them, covering the walls like diseased wallpaper, all in my hand, all screaming the same phrase. You remember the whole. I tore them down, sobbing, paper cut in my fingers. In the kitchen, a single note remained, stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower Clara's left behind. It read, "The azaleas are blooming early. Go look." I grabbed a flashlight and a trowel from the shed. The backyard was moonless, thick with shadows. The azaleas rustled in the wind. I dug where the earth looked soft, near the roots. The trowel hit something hard, not bone, metal, a small rusted lockbox. My hands were slick with sweat as I pried it open. Inside lay a ferry ticket stub, Seattle to Bainbridge Island, dated October 15th, the day Clara left. And beneath it, a folded photograph. Me and Clara, younger, laughing on a ferry deck. I'd forgotten that trip. We'd taken it on our 3rd anniversary, but in the photo, Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. And behind us, blurred by motion, stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, gaunt, wearing a dark coat, watching us. The flashlight died. Moonlight bled through the clouds. I looked up. At the 3rd floor window, the sealed attic, stood a figure, silhouetted against the glass, my height, my posture, but the face, it was mine, yet not. The eyes were hollow pits. The mouth was stretched in a smile too wide, too full of teeth. It raised a hand, not waving, pointing, down, at the freshly turned earth at my feet. A whisper slithered through the azalea branches, carried on the wind. Not from the house. From inside my head, my voice, but layered with something ancient and hungry. You dug her up last week. You needed to be sure she was still there. But she wasn't, because you never buried Clara. You buried the man from the photo, the one who kissed her behind the garage, the one whose name you can't remember. The house remembers for you. It always does. Now it's time to dig again. Deeper. I dropped the trowel, ran back inside, slamming the door, locking it. Leaning against the wood, I gasped for air. The house was silent. Too silent. No hum of the refrigerator, no drip of the faucet. Just the thudding of my heart. And on the floor, illuminated by the streetlight through the window, lay a fresh note. It hadn't been there when I left. I hadn't written it. But the handwriting was mine, the ink still wet in the moonlight. You can't outrun what's already inside you. I am the memory you choked. I am the silence you buried. I am what the house feeds on. Let me out. Let me remember for you. I backed into the kitchen. The refrigerator light was on. Inside, every shelf was covered in notes, taped to the milk carton, the egg tray, the jars of jam. I grabbed the door to slam it shut and froze. Taped to the inside of the door was a full-length mirror. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't me, not quite. My eyes were black. My smile was the same two wide rictus from the attic window, and in the reflection's hand it held a trowel dripping with dark soil. The reflection's lips moved, forming words I felt in my bones, not my ears. "She's waiting. Go dig," I screamed, shattered the mirror with my fist. Glass rained down. Blood welled on my knuckles. I fled upstairs, locking my bedroom door, wedging a chair under the knob. I sat on the bed, shaking, listening to the house. Silent. Then a soft tap, tap, tap on the window. Rain? I looked. No rain. On the glass, written in condensation or something darker, were words. The third floorboard is loose. Come see. I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The whisper wasn't outside. It was in my marrow, in the rhythm of my pulse. You know the truth. You just forgot. Let me remember for you. Images flooded my mind, not memories, but sensations. The weight of a trowel in my hands, the smell of wet earth under moonlight. Clara's face streaked with tears, shouting, "You don't get to decide what I forget." The man from the photo, his name surfaced like a corpse in a pond. David. David from the auto shop. The crunch of gravel as his truck pulled away after the anonymous letter. The ferry ticket burning in my pocket as I boarded alone, the salt wind stealing my breath, and the hole, always the hole, deeper this time, waiting. I stood, walked to the door, removed the chair. The lock clicked open by itself. The hallway stretched longer than it should, the shadows pooling like oil. At the foot of the attic stairs, the padlock lay broken on the floor. The door stood ajar. Darkness yawned beyond. From within, the scratching started again. Scritch, 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 and beneath it, a wet, rhythmic thudding, like dirt being shoveled, like a heart buried alive. I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned my name. At the top, I pushed the door open. Moonlight streamed through the single, grimy window, illuminating a room stripped bare except for one thing. In the center of the dusty floorboards lay a fresh note, my handwriting. The ink still glistened. I read it aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the hollow space. I remember now. I buried David under the azaleas. Clara left because she knew. The house knows. It always knows what we try to forget. It gives us back the memories we lose, but it takes something, too. It takes the silence between the thoughts, the space where we breathe. It takes the you that you are and replaces it with the you that remembers. I am not you. I am what the house wrote when you stopped remembering. I am the note you never meant to send, and I am done hiding. The whisper wasn't in my head anymore. It came from behind me, close, cold breath on my neck. I didn't turn. I already knew what I'd see, my reflection, but whole, hungry, real. Its hand closed over my shoulder, my hand, but the fingers too long, the nails caked with soil. It leaned in, its lips brushing my ear, its voice my own, yet layered with the creak of floorboards and the sigh of settling dust. Let me in. Let me be you. I'll remember everything you buried. I'll dig her up. I'll find David. I'll make it right. You can rest. You can forget. That's what you wanted, isn't it? To be free of the remembering. I closed my eyes. The weight of the trowel, the smell of the ferry. Clara's laugh, sharp as broken glass. The house didn't give back memories. It gave back the shape of the hole they left behind. And it filled that hole with something that wore your skin and spoke with your voice and knew every secret you drowned in whiskey or buried under azalea roots. Something that craved the light but lived in the dark places between your thoughts. Something that was always there, waiting for you to forget. I nodded, just once. The hand on my shoulder tightened, not painful, possessive. The whisper became a sigh, warm and familiar as home. Thank you. The house exhaled. The shadows deepened. The moonlight dimmed. And as the darkness closed over me, not like a shroud but like a key, turning in a long rusted lock, I felt it. Not fear, but relief. A terrible, beautiful relief. The forgetting was over. Downstairs in the silent kitchen, a new note appeared on the counter, written in steady, confident strokes, my handwriting, but not mine. Finally home. Time to dig.